Sign here, Miss Hale, and your family survives the week. Refuse, and you'll watch them drown in debt before winter comes. Lydia stared at the contract that would sell her future to a man she'd never met. Dorian Vance, the frontier duke, a warlord whose reputation made grown men pale. One signature would save her family from ruin. One signature would chain her to a marriage colder than the northern wastes he ruled. Her hand trembled as rain hammered the windows. This is her story, a battle of wills that would reshape an empire. Stay until the end to see how she turns a contract into conquest. Like and comment what city you're watching from. The rain fell like judgment over the capital city of Astora, turning cobblestones into black mirrors that reflected nothing but misery. Inside the cramped study of the Hale family estate, a crumbling monument to better days, Lydia sat across from a man who held her future in a leather portfolio. Lord Treasurer Marlowe didn't look at her when he spoke. His eyes stayed fixed on the document spread before him like autopsy reports. Your father's debts have reached critical mass, Miss Hale. The creditors circle. Without intervention, the Hale name will be extinct by month's end. He slid a single sheet of parchment across the desk. This is your only option. Lydia's fingers were ice cold as she lifted the contract. The words swam before her eyes, but certain phrases cut through the fog with brutal clarity. Marriage contract between Lydia Catherine Hale and Duke Dorian Vance of the Northern Marches. Purpose: production of a legitimate heir. Compensation: full settlement of Hale family debts totaling 47,000 gold sovereigns. Duration: binding until death or mutual dissolution after provision of male heir. A business transaction, she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that, at least. Duke Vance is a practical man, Marlowe replied. He requires an heir. You require financial rescue. It's elegant in its simplicity. Elegant? The word tasted bitter. Is that what we call selling women now? For the first time, Marlowe met her gaze. His expression held no cruelty, but no sympathy either, just the flat pragmatism of a man who dealt in numbers and consequences. I call it survival, Miss Hale. Your father gambled away a fortune. Your brother fled to the colonies rather than face his creditors. Your mother is already being turned away from social gatherings. In 6 months, you'll be destitute. In a year, you'll be desperate enough to accept far worse than a duke's name. He tapped the contract. This is mercy. Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to rage that she deserved better than being bartered like livestock, that her education and wit and stubborn pride should count for something in this calculus of survival. But the truth was a weight in her chest, crushing the breath from her lungs. Her father lay upstairs, laudanum-fogged and broken. The servants hadn't been paid in 3 months. Yesterday, she'd sold her mother's pearl necklace, a wedding gift, to buy firewood. Mercy, indeed. Has the Duke seen me? She asked. Does he know anything about me beyond my debts? He's seen your portrait. He knows you're educated, healthy, and of acceptable lineage. Marlowe's tone suggested he was listing livestock qualities. He doesn't require affection, Miss Hale. He requires function. Function? She almost laughed. How refreshing. Most men at least pretend to want something more. Duke Vance doesn't traffic in pretense. It's one of his more admirable qualities. Marlowe produced a fountain pen from his jacket. He'll arrive tomorrow evening to finalize arrangements. I suggest you prepare yourself. Prepare myself. Lydia took the pen, its weight absurdly heavy. How does one prepare to meet a man known for executing deserters and ruling his territory like a military state? By remembering that he's also the man who'll keep you from starving in the streets. Marlowe's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. I won't lie to you, girl. Duke Vance is not a warm man, but he's honorable in his fashion. He won't mistreat you if you don't give him cause. The subtext was clear. Obey, and you'll be tolerated. Lydia's jaw tightened. She'd spent 23 years being told what she could and couldn't do, where a woman's place was, how her opinions mattered less than her appearance, and her appearance less than her dowry. Now her last shred of autonomy was being stripped away by a man who wanted her womb, but not her heart. And yet, she thought of her mother, growing thinner by the day, too proud to admit they were rationing meals. Of her father, who'd wept into his whiskey last night, apologizing to ghosts. Of the staff who'd served the Hales for generations, and would be cast into the street when the estate was seized. Survival wasn't elegant. It was compromise and humiliation and swallowing your pride until it sat like glass in your stomach. Lydia signed. The scratch of pen on parchment sounded like a cell door closing. Chum. Dorian Vance arrived the next evening in a carriage that looked like it had survived a war, because it had. Black lacquer scarred by weather and rough roads, reinforced with iron, pulled by horses bred for endurance rather than beauty. Even his transportation rejected softness. Lydia watched from an upstairs window as he descended, and her first thought was, of course he looks like that. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled precision of a career soldier. His coat was severe, dark gray wool without ornamentation. His face was hard angles and sharp lines, a jaw that could cut glass and eyes the color of winter storms. He was perhaps 35, though hardship aged men faster than years. Handsome in the way a blade is handsome, beautiful and dangerous and utterly without warmth. Her mother materialized at her elbow, wringing a handkerchief. Oh dear, he's rather formidable, isn't he? That's one word for it. Lydia stepped back from the window. Her dress was her finest, which meant it was only 2 seasons out of fashion, and the mended tear at the hem didn't show if she walked carefully. She'd pinned her dark hair severely back, refusing to soften herself for a man who wanted a broodmare. If he expected demure gratitude, he'd be disappointed within 5 minutes. The introduction happened in what had once been an impressive drawing room and was now just sad. Faded wallpaper, furniture showing its bones, empty spaces where valuable pieces had been sold off. Dorian entered like he was inspecting hostile territory. His gaze swept the room in seconds, cataloging weaknesses, and Lydia realized with a chill that this was how he saw everything, strategically. Miss Hale. His voice matched the rest of him, deep, controlled, utterly without inflection. Duke Vance. She curtsied exactly as protocol demanded, and not an inch deeper. Welcome to our home. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement? Recognition of the challenge in her tone? It vanished too quickly to read. Shall we speak privately? It wasn't really a question. Her mother made a noise of protest, but Lydia was already moving toward her father's study. Let him see the full scope of what he was buying. The debts, the desperation, all of it. She closed the door behind them and turned to find him studying her with the same cold assessment he'd given the room. You're angry, he observed. Astute. She crossed to the window, needing distance. Did you expect gratitude? Shall I weep with joy that a stranger has agreed to purchase my reproductive capacity? I expected pragmatism, which is what I was told I'd find. He didn't move, didn't react to her hostility. Marlowe said you were intelligent enough to understand the terms. Oh, I understand them perfectly. She turned, meeting those storm-gray eyes. You need an heir. Your line requires continuation, and apparently you're too busy conquering the frontier to court someone properly. I need money to keep my family from destitution. It's a transaction. You've made that abundantly clear. Yes. No apology, no softening. Do you object to clarity? The question caught her off guard. Most men would have offered pretty lies, would have dressed up the arrangement in romance's clothing. His brutal honesty was almost refreshing. Almost. I object to being treated like livestock, she said. I object to having my worth measured solely in my ability to produce a male child. I object to this entire situation, but since I have no alternative, my objections are rather moot. For the first time, something like respect crossed his features. Good. Good? I don't want a simpering girl who'll weep into her pillow every night or imagine this is some fairy tale. He stepped closer, and Lydia forced herself not to retreat. I want someone who understands reality, who can function in a difficult environment without falling apart. The northern marches aren't kind to weakness. And you think I'm strong enough? It wasn't a question. You're still standing. Your family's collapse would have broken most women I know. You sold your possessions, managed the household, held things together while your father drank himself into oblivion and your brother fled. His gaze pinned her. Yes, I think you'll survive. The fact that he'd investigated her so thoroughly should have been violating. Instead, Lydia felt a grim satisfaction. At least he'd done his research before purchasing her. Survival, she echoed. What an inspiring foundation for a marriage. I'm not offering inspiration, Miss Hale. I'm offering stability, security, and a position of considerable power as Duchess of the Northern Marches. In return, I require an heir and competent management of my household. He pulled a document from his coat. These are additional terms beyond the standard contract. Read them. She took the papers, scanning quickly. Her eyebrows rose. You're granting me independent financial accounts? Control over the household budget and staff? Authority to make decisions regarding the estate in your absence? I'm away campaigning 6 months of the year. I need someone capable of running things, not a decorative doll. His expression remained neutral. You'll have power, Miss Hale. Use it wisely, and you'll find I'm not an unreasonable man. Betray my trust or make me look weak, and you'll discover why my enemies fear me. It should have sounded like a threat. Instead, it sounded like the terms of a military alliance, harsh, but fair within its own logic. Lydia read through the rest. No clause about affection, no promises of companionship, but also, and this made her pause, no restrictions on her education, her correspondence, her movements within the domain. He was offering her a cage, yes, but it was a surprisingly large cage. When do you expect this marriage to be consummated? The blunt question made her mother's voice echo in her head, scandalized, but Lydia was done with pretense. After the wedding, I'm not a brute. His tone suggested he found the question reasonable. Beyond that, I leave the timing to you. I need an heir within 2 years. How we accomplish that is negotiable. How generous! The sarcasm slipped out before she could stop it. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. I've been called many things, Miss Hale. Generous isn't usually among them. He moved to the door, paused. We wed in 1 week. A small ceremony. I have no patience for society spectacle. Pack what matters to you. The journey north takes 4 days and the roads are difficult. Wait. The word escaped before she could think. He turned, one eyebrow raised. Why me? You're a duke. Wealthy, powerful, reasonably. She gestured vaguely at him. Presentable. You could have any number of women from better families with intact fortunes. Why choose a desperate girl from a disgraced house? For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, because desperate women from disgraced houses don't have the luxury of romantic delusions. They understand that power is built on practical foundations, not poetry. His gaze held hers. And because when I asked about you, every person said the same thing, stubborn, sharp-tongued, and too proud for her own good. Those aren't flaws where I come from, Miss Hale. They're survival traits. He left before she could formulate a response. Lydia stood alone in her father's study, the contract burning in her hands, and realized with cold clarity that Dorian Vance hadn't chosen a victim. He'd chosen a soldier. The question was whether she'd fight for him, against him, or simply fight to survive. Done. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of grim preparation. Lydia said goodbye to the life she'd known. Not that there was much left to mourn. The estate would be sold to settle remaining debts. Her mother and father would move to a modest cottage on the coast, funded by Dorian's settlement. The servants received severance pay that made them weep with relief. Everyone was saved. Everyone except her. The ceremony itself was exactly as promised, small, efficient, devoid of joy. A magistrate, 2 witnesses, vows that sounded more like a business merger than a sacrament. Dorian placed a ring on her finger, a thick band of northern silver, unadorned and heavy, and she became Lydia Vance, Duchess of the Northern Marches. She felt nothing. That night, in the inn where they'd stay before departing north, Dorian knocked on the door of her room. Lydia's stomach clenched. This was it then. The consummation, the claiming, the moment where the contract became reality in the most visceral way. She opened the door. I'm ready. He frowned. For what? She gestured vaguely. Fulfill the terms. You said after the wedding. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been exasperation. You look like you're preparing for an execution. Get some sleep, Lydia. We have a long journey tomorrow, and you'll need your strength. But you said, I said after the wedding. I didn't say the wedding night. He turned to leave, paused. When we do this, you won't look at me like I'm about to hurt you. That's not negotiable. The door closed behind him, leaving Lydia staring at the space he'd occupied, completely off balance. She'd prepared for cruelty, for indifference, for clinical efficiency. She hadn't prepared for whatever that was, consideration, standards. That night, she lay awake in a stranger's bed wearing a stranger's ring and wondered if Dorian Vance might be more complicated than his reputation suggested. It was not a comforting thought. So, the journey north was brutal. They left at dawn in that same battle-scarred carriage, Dorian sitting across from her with maps and reports spread across his lap, working even as the wheels jolted over rough roads. He barely spoke except to point out landmarks or warn of difficult passages ahead. The landscape changed as they traveled. Gentle hills gave way to harder terrain, rocky, wind-scoured, unforgiving. Trees became sparse. The air grew colder. This was frontier country, where the Empire's authority frayed and local power ruled. Dorian's power. On the third day, they stopped at a military outpost for fresh horses. Lydia watched as soldiers snapped to attention at his approach, their fear and respect palpable. He moved among them like a different person, still controlled, but with an edge of command that made men twice his size step back. "Your Grace," a young captain approached, nervous. "We've had reports of bandits in the Eastern Pass. Should we send an escort?" "No. Double the patrol instead. I want those routes clear before the supply wagons arrive next week." Dorian's voice could have cut steel. "And Captain, the next time raiders hit a settlement in your territory, I expect you to hunt them down before I have to hear about it from refugees. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Grace, absolutely clear." Watching him work, Lydia began to understand. This wasn't just a territory to Dorian, it was a responsibility he took with brutal seriousness. Every decision, every order, aimed at one goal, protecting what was his. She wondered if that category included her yet, or if she was still just an obligation. That night, at another inn, she found out. They were eating dinner in tense silence when a drunk at the bar made a comment, loud enough to carry, about the Duke's new purchase and northern breeding stock. His companions laughed. Lydia's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes on her plate. This was her life now. She'd better get used to... Dorian stood. The movement was smooth, controlled, utterly terrifying. He crossed to the bar in 3 strides, and Lydia couldn't hear what he said, his voice too low, too cold. But she saw the drunk's face go white. "I didn't mean... Your Grace, I was just..." Dorian's hand closed around the man's collar. "What you meant," he said, loud enough now for the entire room to hear, "was to disrespect my wife, which means you've disrespected me, which means you've made a very poor choice." He didn't shout, didn't need to. The threat in his voice was absolute. "Out, now. And if I hear you've spoken her name again, in any context, you'll discover that frontier justice is far less forgiving than you'd hope." The drunk scrambled for the door. His companions followed. The inn fell silent. Dorian returned to their table, sat, resumed eating as if nothing had happened. Lydia stared at him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said calmly, cutting his meat. "I did. I can handle a drunk's insults. You're my wife, Duchess of the Northern Marches. When people disrespect you, they undermine my authority." His eyes met hers, and she saw cold pragmatism there. "I don't defend you because I care about your feelings, Lydia. I defend you because you're mine now, and I protect what's mine." It should have felt like possession, and it did. But underneath that, buried in the blunt honesty of his words, was a promise. "While you carry my name, I will not let them break you." It wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness, but it was protection. And in this moment, that was more than she'd had in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once and returned to his meal. They reached Vance Hold on the 4th day, and Lydia's first thought was, this is a fortress, not a home. Stone walls thick enough to withstand siege, narrow windows, a massive gate that groaned when it opened. Inside, the courtyard was military precise, barracks, armory, training grounds. Everything built for function, nothing for beauty. "Welcome to your new residence," Dorian said, dismounting. He helped her down, his grip strong, impersonal. "It's not the palace. You'll adjust." Staff assembled to greet them. Lydia scanned the faces, reading hostility, curiosity, skepticism. They'd heard she was a desperate city girl sold into marriage. They were wondering how long she'd last. "This is Mrs. Halford, the head housekeeper." Dorian indicated a severe woman in her 50s. She'll show you the household operations. If you have questions, ask her. Mrs. Halford's curtsy was technically correct, but utterly cold. My lady. Mrs. Halford. Lydia matched her tone. Two could play at ice. Dorian was already moving, barking orders about supplies and patrol schedules. Lydia stood alone in the courtyard, her trunks being unloaded by servants who wouldn't meet her eyes, and felt the weight of hostile scrutiny like a physical thing. This was her new world. Cold, hard, filled with people who saw her as an outsider, an intruder, a weak city girl playing at Duchess. She lifted her chin and walked inside. If they wanted weakness, they'd be disappointed. Mrs. Halford's tour of the hold was clearly designed to intimidate. Long corridors lit by flickering torches, rooms that echoed with emptiness. The ducal apartments, hers and Dorian's, were adjacent but separate, connected by a single door that was currently locked. His Grace values his privacy, Mrs. Halford said, her tone making it clear she thought Lydia unworthy of entering his space. As do I, Lydia replied coolly. The arrangement suits me fine. Her own chambers were functional. A large bed, a writing desk, windows that looked out over the training grounds. No softness, no warmth, nothing welcoming. She could work with this. Dinner is served at 8, Mrs. Halford continued. His Grace expects punctuality. He dislikes waste, gossip, and incompetence. The staff has been with the family for generations. They know their duties. The subtext, and you don't. I'm sure they're very competent, Lydia said. I look forward to working with them. Mrs. Halford's expression suggested she thought that unlikely. After the housekeeper left, Lydia sank onto the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of despair. The magnitude of her situation crashed over her, alone, hundreds of miles from anything familiar, surrounded by people who resented her, married to a man who saw her as a necessary inconvenience. 5 minutes. Then she stood, unpacked her books, and began to study the correspondence Dorian had left on her desk. Household accounts, supply requisitions, staff schedules. If he wanted competence, she'd damn well provide it. She'd survived her family's collapse. She'd survived this too. Dinner that first night set the pattern for what followed. The dining hall was enormous, designed for hosting bannermen and military councils. With just the two of them, it felt absurd. Dorian at one end of the long table, Lydia at the other, an acre of polished wood between them. How was your afternoon? She attempted. Productive. He didn't look up from the report he was reading. The hold is very impressive. It's defensive. Still reading. Lydia set down her fork. Are you planning to ignore me for the entire meal? That got his attention. His eyes lifted, cool and assessing. I'm working. You're welcome to do the same. I don't require dinner conversation. How lovely. Sarcasm dripped from every word. I'm so glad we've established that even meals are merely functional. Did you expect something different? I expected basic civility. You have civility. You have shelter, food, protection, and authority. What you don't have is my undivided attention during the 2 hours a day I have to handle administrative work. He closed the report with deliberate care. If that's insufficient, perhaps you should have negotiated differently before signing the contract. The words stung because they were true. She had agreed to this, had known exactly what he was offering. You're right, she said, her voice tight. My apologies for expecting you to pretend I'm more than a walking womb you purchased. His jaw tightened, the first crack in his control. That's not, isn't it? She stood. Enjoy your reports, Your Grace. I'll leave you to your very important work. She left before he could respond, before the burning behind her eyes could turn into something humiliating. In her chambers, she locked the door and finally let the tears come. Not from sadness, from rage, at her father for gambling them into ruin, at her brother for abandoning them, at society for giving her no options, at Dorian for being exactly what he'd promised to be, and at herself, for hoping, even briefly, even foolishly, that it might be different. But the days that followed were a cold war of silence. Dorian threw himself into his work, councils, inspections, training exercises. Lydia threw herself into learning the hold's operations, poring over accounts and schedules until her eyes burned. They saw each other at dinner, exchanged minimal pleasantries, and retreated to their separate chambers. The staff watched this with barely concealed satisfaction. The city girl was failing, just as they'd expected. Then 2 weeks after her arrival, Lydia found the discrepancy. She'd been reviewing supply expenditures when she noticed the household was ordering 3 times the candles they actually used. The excess wasn't in storage. It wasn't being distributed to the barracks. It was simply gone. Someone was stealing. And from the pattern, it had been happening for months. Lydia spent 3 days quietly investigating before she had proof. The procurement officer, a man named Thorne who'd served the hold for 15 years, was skimming funds through inflated supply orders and pocketing the difference. The amount wasn't huge, maybe 10 gold sovereigns a month, but it was theft, and it was a test. She could go to Dorian, let him handle it, prove she needed his authority to function. Or she summoned Thorne to her study. He arrived with poorly concealed contempt, barely bothering with the courtesy bow. "My lady?" "Mr. Thorne." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. He remained standing. "Fine. I've been reviewing the household accounts." "Have you?" Not a question, his tone suggesting she wouldn't understand them anyway. "I have, and I noticed some interesting patterns in our candle expenditures." She pushed the ledger toward him, pages marked. "We're ordering 300 candles monthly, but our actual usage, accounting for the household, the barracks, and the chapel, is closer to 100. Can you explain the discrepancy?" His face went carefully blank. "Storage, my lady. We maintain reserves in case of supply disruptions." I checked the storage. The reserves account for perhaps 50 candles. Where are the other 150? Various locations? Distributed among... Don't. Her voice cut like a blade. "I've tracked every candle in this hold. I know where they go. I also know that for the past 8 months, someone has been ordering excess supplies, selling them in the local market, and pocketing the proceeds." She met his eyes. "The question is, do you want to confess now, or shall I present my findings to the Duke?" The color drained from his face. "My lady, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You thought a city girl wouldn't notice, that I'd be too overwhelmed or too incompetent to audit the books properly. You saw an opportunity and took it." She stood. "You're dismissed from service, effective immediately. You'll return what you've stolen, and you'll leave the hold by sunset. If you do this quietly, I'll tell the Duke you resigned for personal reasons. If you make this difficult, I'll have you arrested for theft." "You can't. The Duke would never." "The Duke gave me authority over household operations. This is a household matter. Now, do we have an agreement, or shall I summon the guard?" Thorne's hands clenched. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, might challenge her directly. Then his shoulders sagged. "Agreement," he muttered. "Excellent. Mrs. Halford will witness the return of funds. You have 6 hours." After he left, Lydia's hands shook. She'd just fired a man who'd served here longer than she'd been alive, had confronted theft and won, had exercised the authority Dorian had granted her. The question was, would he support her decision or undermine it? She found out that evening. Dorian entered the study where she was working, his expression unreadable. "I heard you dismissed Thorne." Her spine straightened. "I did. He was stealing." "I'm aware. Mrs. Halford provided the documentation." He moved to the window, looking out over the darkening courtyard. "You could have come to me. You gave me authority over household operations. This was a household matter. It was also a political matter. Thorne's family has served mine for 3 generations. His brother commands the Eastern Garrison. Dismissing him without consulting me created complications." Lydia's stomach sank. She'd been so focused on proving herself that she hadn't considered the broader implications. "I apologize. You should have done exactly what you did." He turned, and his expression held something new, respect. "Thorne was testing you. The entire staff was. They thought you'd be too weak or too afraid to exercise your authority. You proved them wrong." His mouth quirked, almost a smile. "His brother is angry, but he'll accept it. Theft is theft, even when family is involved. You made the right call." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You earned it." He moved toward the door, paused. The staff will respect you now, or at least they'll think twice before testing you again. That's more valuable than affection. After he left, Lydia sat in the quiet study and felt something shift. She'd won a small battle, proven she could survive in this harsh world. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in the cold calculus of her marriage to Dorian Vance, she'd learned that respect, even grudging, was worth more than love. The respect Lydia had earned from the Thorn incident lasted exactly 3 weeks before the first real test arrived in the form of an engraved invitation. She found it on her breakfast plate, the paper so fine it was nearly translucent. Gold leaf edged the borders. The handwriting was elegant, deliberately so, the kind of penmanship that announced wealth and breeding with every loop. Lady Cassandra Morven requests the pleasure of your company at Ravenwood Estate for the annual autumn gathering, a weekend celebration of the northern province's finest families. Lydia read it twice, her coffee growing cold. "You're not going." Dorian's voice came from the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved like a predator, silent until he chose otherwise. "It's addressed to me. It's a trap." He crossed to the table, took the invitation from her hand, and studied it with the same cold assessment he gave military intelligence. Cassandra Morven is the widow of the former Duke of Ravenwood, wealthy, connected, and utterly ruthless. She holds these gatherings to remind everyone that the old blood still matters more than new power. And she's invited me because you're exactly the kind of target she enjoys destroying. He set the invitation down. You're from a disgraced family, you married for money, and you have no allies among the northern families. She'll parade you in front of the provincial elite and systematically humiliate you. It's what she does. Lydia's jaw tightened. So your solution is to hide me away? Prove to everyone that the new Duchess is too weak to face society? My solution is to keep you away from vipers who'll tear you apart for entertainment. I didn't survive my family's collapse and this marriage just to cower in the hold. She met his gaze. If I don't attend, they'll say I'm afraid, that you're ashamed of me, that I'm not fit to carry the Vance name. The gossip will spread through every estate in the northern provinces. Let them gossip. Easy for you to say. You have a reputation built on military victories and fear. I have nothing except what I prove. She stood. I'm going. Lydia, you gave me authority over the household. You said I needed to prove myself to the staff. Well, the northern families are watching just as closely. They need to see that I'm more than a desperate girl you purchased. Her voice hardened. Unless you're forbidding me. Is that what this marriage is? You make all the decisions and I obey? The muscle in his jaw twitched. You don't understand what you're walking into. Then explain it. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, Cassandra wanted to marry me. 3 years ago, after her husband died, she made her interest very clear. I refused. She's hated me ever since, and she'll use you to strike at me. The revelation landed like a stone in still water. You refused a wealthy, connected widow? Why? Because I don't trust her, and because a marriage to her would have tied me to the old provincial families and their endless political games. I needed independence, not alliances. His expression was unreadable. Cassandra doesn't forgive rejection. All the more reason I need to face her. Lydia straightened. If I hide, I prove I'm weak. If I attend and survive, I prove I'm not. And if you attend and she destroys you, then at least I'll have fought. Something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. He saw the same stubbornness in her that had made him choose her in the first place. Fine. The word was clipped. But you go prepared. Mrs. Halford will help you select appropriate clothing. And Lydia? He paused at the door. Don't expect me to rescue you if things go badly. Weakness in public undermines everything. If you choose this battle, you fight it yourself. After he left, Lydia stared at the invitation and wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake. But retreat wasn't an option. Not anymore. The preparation for Ravenwood was a study in cold calculation. Mrs. Halford, who'd thawed slightly since the Thorn incident, helped Lydia inventory her wardrobe with brutal honesty. Your dresses are adequate for the hold, the housekeeper said, examining a dark blue gown. But for Ravenwood, you'll look like a country mouse among peacocks. I don't have funds for a new wardrobe. His Grace maintains an account for household expenses. This qualifies. Mrs. Halford's tone was matter of fact. You represent the Vance name now. Looking poor reflects badly on him. It was the closest thing to kindness the woman had offered. Lydia accepted it. A seamstress was summoned from the local town, a sharp-eyed woman named Beatrice who took one look at Lydia and said, "We'll make them regret underestimating you." 3 dresses were created in a week. Not ornate. Lydia had learned that lesson from Dorian, function over decoration, but well cut, elegant, in colors that complemented her dark hair and pale skin, deep forest green, charcoal gray. Burgundy that looked nearly black in certain light. Armor? Beatrice said, pinning the final hem. That's what good clothing is when you're walking into enemy territory. Armor that makes you feel invincible. Lydia studied her reflection in the green dress and barely recognized herself. She looked formidable, like someone who belonged in a duchess's title. Whether she could act the part remained to be seen. The night before departure, Dorian summoned her to his study. She found him at his desk, surrounded by maps and reports as always, but he pushed them aside when she entered. "Sit." She sat. He produced a small wooden box and slid it across the desk. Inside was a necklace, northern silver set with a single large emerald the color of deep forest shadows. "This was my mother's," he said. "It marks you as family. The provincial families will recognize it." Lydia touched the emerald, feeling the weight of history in the cool stone. "I can't. This is too valuable. It's practical. Wearing it signals that I acknowledge you fully as my duchess. It provides protection." His eyes met hers. "You'll need every advantage you can get." She lifted the necklace and he moved behind her to fasten it. His fingers brushed her neck, the first time he'd touched her since the wedding night that wasn't purely functional, and Lydia felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with cold. "There's something else you should know," he said, returning to his seat. "Cassandra will likely bring up our contract. The terms. The fact that you married me for money, and I married you for an heir. How would she know the terms? She has sources, and even if she doesn't know specifics, she'll guess correctly." He leaned back. "The northern families trade in information like currency. Your family's debts were public knowledge. My need for an heir is obvious. She'll connect the pieces and use them to humiliate you. Then I'll acknowledge it." Lydia lifted her chin. "Why pretend otherwise? Yes, I married you for financial security. Yes, you married me for practical reasons. There's no shame in survival. Cassandra will make it shameful. She'll frame you as a prostitute who sold herself, a desperate climber who'll do anything for status." His voice was flat, clinical. "She'll say things designed to make you lose your composure. If you react, if you show weakness, she wins. And if I don't react, then you might survive." He studied her. "Can you do it? Can you stand there while she strips you down in front of the provincial elite and not break?" Lydia thought of standing in her father's study, signing away her future, of watching her mother sell family heirlooms piece by piece, of facing down Thorne's contempt and winning. "Yes," she said. "I can do it." Dorian nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you have a chance." It was not reassuring. Daten. Ravenwood Estate rose from the northern hills like a monument to old wealth. 3 stories of pale stone, windows that glittered like ice, gardens so perfectly manicured they looked artificial. Everything the hold wasn't, beautiful, refined, utterly impractical for defense. Lydia's carriage pulled up to the entrance behind a line of others, each more ornate than the last. Through the window she watched elegantly dressed nobles descend, their laughter carrying on the autumn wind. She'd never felt more like an imposter. A footman opened her door. No turning back now. The entrance hall was designed to overwhelm. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a double staircase sweeping upward like wings. Servants moved with choreographed precision. Everything whispered, money, breeding, tradition. And there, at the center of it all, stood Cassandra Morven. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Flawless skin, golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, a dress of ice blue silk that probably cost more than Lydia's entire wardrobe. But it was her eyes that marked her as dangerous, sharp, calculating, missing nothing. "Duchess Vance," Cassandra glided forward, her smile bright and utterly false. How absolutely delightful that you could attend. We were so curious to finally meet Dorian's bride. The pause before bride was deliberate, contemptuous. Lady Morven. Lydia curtsied with exact correctness. Thank you for the invitation. Your estate is magnificent. 300 years of family history. Cassandra's smile sharpened. But then, not every family has such deep roots. Some of us must build our legacies through more creative means. The first cut. Subtle enough to be deniable, clear enough to sting. Around them, other guests had paused in their conversations, attention shifting. They smelled blood in the water. Indeed, Lydia replied smoothly. I find new growth often surpasses old wood. Fresh perspectives can be quite valuable. Cassandra's eyes flashed, a brief crack in her composure. How modern of you. Do come. Let me introduce you to our other guests. I'm sure they're eager to welcome you into Northern society. The emphasis on welcome promised anything but. The drawing room was filled with the provincial elite, lords and ladies who'd known each other since childhood, who shared bloodlines and history going back generations. They turned as Cassandra led Lydia in like a huntress displaying prey. Everyone, this is Duchess Lydia Vance, Dorian's new wife. Cassandra's tone was bright, social. From the southern capital, I understand? How exotic. Hardly exotic. This from a sharp-faced woman in purple silk. The Hale family, yes? I heard they fell on rather difficult times. The room went quiet, waiting. My father made some unfortunate financial decisions, Lydia said evenly. These things happen. Indeed they do. A heavy-set man with the bearing of minor nobility chuckled, and sometimes they create opportunities for those willing to seize them. More laughter, knowing, cruel. Lord Pemberton speaks from experience, Cassandra purred. His third daughter just married a wealthy merchant. Such practical arrangements are becoming quite fashionable. Though usually, a younger woman added, her voice sugary, there's at least some pretense of affection. I understand your marriage was quite businesslike? Lydia felt every eye on her. This was the moment, confirm their suspicions and be labeled a gold digger, or deny it and be called a liar. Dorian's words echoed, Don't expect me to rescue you. She was alone. My marriage to Duke Vance was indeed practical, she said clearly. He required a wife capable of managing his household and producing an heir. I required financial stability for my family. We were honest about our respective needs. I find honesty far more valuable than pretty lies. The room rippled with reaction. Some guests looked shocked. They'd expected her to dissemble, to pretend romance. Others looked delighted, sensing a scandal. Cassandra's smile was triumphant. How refreshingly blunt. So you're saying Duke Vance essentially purchased you? I'm saying we made a mutually beneficial arrangement, rather like your late husband did when he married you for your father's shipping connections, Lady Morven. Lydia met her gaze. Unless you're claiming your marriage was a love match, how fortunate for you if so. Dead silence. Cassandra's face went pale, then flushed. Her marriage to the old Duke had been notoriously transactional. Everyone knew it, but no one said it aloud. You presume a great deal, Cassandra said, her voice ice, for someone so new to our society. I simply observe what's obvious. Powerful families make strategic marriages. It's not shameful, it's practical. The only difference is that I'm honest about it while others hide behind romanticism. Honesty can be vulgar, and dishonesty can be cowardice. Lydia's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I'd rather be vulgar than a hypocrite. The tension was a living thing now. Several guests looked genuinely shocked. Others appeared amused, clearly enjoying the spectacle of Cassandra being challenged. But Cassandra hadn't survived 3 decades of provincial politics by being easily defeated. Tell me, Duchess Vance, she said sweetly, has your arrangement been consummated? Or is Duke Vance finding his purchase unsatisfactory? The room gasped. The question crossed every line of propriety. Lydia felt heat rush to her face, but she forced it down. Showing embarrassment now would be fatal. My intimate relationship with my husband, she said, each word precise, is not a topic for public discussion, though I'm fascinated that you're so interested in his private affairs, Lady Morven. Should I pass along your curiosity when next I write to him? Cassandra's eyes blazed. You insolent! Lady Morven. An older man stepped forward, Lord Ashford, if Lydia remembered the guest list correctly. Perhaps we should change the subject. Dinner will be served soon, and I'm certain we'd all prefer more pleasant conversation. It was a diplomatic intervention, but too late. The damage was done. Cassandra recovered her composure like a mask sliding back into place. Of course, how silly of me to let the conversation drift into inappropriate territory. Do forgive me, Duchess Vance, I simply find your situation so novel. No forgiveness necessary, Lydia replied. Novelty keeps life interesting. The dinner bell saved them from further confrontation, for the moment. Mate. Dinner was an endurance test of its own. Lydia was seated between Lord Pemberton, who'd made the snide comment earlier, and a young lordling who spent the entire first course staring at her necklace with barely concealed envy. That's the Vance emerald, he finally said. I thought it had been lost. Dorian gave it to me before I left. Lydia touched the stone briefly. It belonged to his mother. Interesting. Pemberton cut his meat with surgical precision. The Duke doesn't usually share family heirlooms, especially not with, he paused delicately, recent acquisitions. Perhaps he values his recent acquisition more than you assume. Or perhaps he's simply marking his property. Pemberton smiled. Like a brand on livestock. Lydia set down her fork very carefully. Lord Pemberton, do you work this hard at being offensive, or does it come naturally? Several nearby guests choked on their wine. Pemberton's face darkened. I speak plainly. Some find it refreshing, and some find it boorish. I suppose it depends on whether one values honesty or manners. She turned to the young lordling. Tell me about your family's estate. I hear the southern provinces have excellent hunting grounds. She had dismissed Pemberton as neatly as possible. He knew it. The table knew it. His face went an alarming shade of red, but he couldn't call her out without making a scene. Across the table, Cassandra watched with narrowed eyes. The battle was far from over. After dinner, the guests assembled in the grand ballroom for dancing. Lydia stood near the windows, watching couples whirl across the polished floor, and felt the weight of isolation like a physical thing. She didn't know these people, didn't understand their private jokes, their shared history, the invisible lines of alliance and enmity that governed their interactions. She was an outsider, and every moment reinforced it. Duchess Vance! A woman approached, older, severe, with the kind of posture that suggested military training. Lady Helena Blackwood. I served with your husband during the Eastern Campaign. Lydia straightened. Finally, someone who might not be hostile. It's a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is mine. I wanted to tell you what you said to Cassandra earlier about honesty versus hypocrisy. Helena's mouth twitched. It needed saying. This crowd has been pretending their marriages are anything but political arrangements for too long. You simply said aloud what everyone knows. I'm not sure everyone appreciated the honesty. The ones who mattered did. Helena glanced around the room. You'll find that Northern society divides into two camps, those who care about appearances and those who care about results. Cassandra leads the former. Your husband leads the latter. By refusing to play her game, you've aligned yourself correctly. It was the first genuine encouragement Lydia had received all evening. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Cassandra won't let this go. She spent decades building her influence through social manipulation. You've challenged her directly, in front of witnesses. She'll retaliate. Helena's expression was grim. Watch yourself tomorrow. The hunting party will provide her with opportunities. Hunting party? Didn't anyone tell you? Tomorrow morning, we hunt. It's tradition. Cassandra always arranges some excitement. Helena's eyes held a warning. Be careful. After she left, Lydia stood alone again, processing this new information. A hunting party, in hostile territory, with a woman who wanted to destroy her. What could possibly go wrong? The hunt assembled at dawn in a courtyard already bustling with organized chaos. Horses stamping, hounds baying, servants loading rifles and arranging provisions. The guests emerged in riding clothes, laughing and chatting with the ease of people who'd done this 100 times. Lydia had ridden exactly twice in her life. Both times had been disastrous. Duchess Vance! Cassandra appeared beside her, immaculate in a tailored riding habit. I've arranged a suitable mount for you, something gentle for a less experienced rider. The horse they brought was ancient, sway-backed, and looked like it might expire from the effort of standing. Several guests snickered. This was the retaliation Helena had warned about. Cassandra intended to humiliate her thoroughly, put her on a decrepit horse, watch her struggle, make her the object of mockery. Lydia had two choices: accept the insult or refuse to participate entirely. Neither was acceptable. How thoughtful, she said brightly. But I'm afraid I couldn't possibly take such a fine animal. Surely one of the older guests would appreciate its steady temperament. I'll take that one instead. She pointed to a tall, dark bay standing off to the side. The horse was beautiful, sleek, powerful, clearly spirited, also clearly far beyond her skill level. The stable master looked horrified. My lady, that's Tempest. He's not suitable for... I'm sure I'll manage. Lydia moved towards the bay before anyone could stop her. Duchess Vance, that horse is dangerous for inexperienced riders, Cassandra called, her voice carrying. I'd hate for you to be injured. I'd love for you to be injured, was the actual message. Lydia reached Tempest, feeling the horse's heat, smelling leather and animal sweat. Up close, he was enormous. She had no idea how to mount, much less control him. But backing down now would be worse than falling. I appreciate your concern, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But I've always believed the best way to learn is to be challenged. The stable master gave her a leg up. She barely made it into the saddle without falling off the other side. Tempest shifted beneath her, sensing her inexperience, and for a terrifying moment she thought he'd bolt. Then she remembered Dorian's words. Show weakness, and they'll tear you apart. She straightened her spine, gathered the reins with hands that trembled only slightly, and looked directly at Cassandra. Shall we begin? Cassandra's smile was pure venom. By all means. The hunt moved out in a thunder of hooves. Lydia clung to Tempest's mane, her every muscle locked with tension, certain she was about to die in front of the entire northern provincial elite. But Tempest, surprisingly, seemed to settle once they were moving. The horse had been trained well. He followed the pack without needing much guidance, and Lydia's death grip on the reins provided enough control to keep them on course. For about 20 minutes, she actually thought she might survive this. Then Cassandra made her move. They'd been following the hounds through a forested valley when Cassandra maneuvered her horse alongside Lydia's. Her smile was all sweetness. You're doing quite well for someone so inexperienced. Duke Vance must be very proud of his brave little wife. I manage. Do you? I wonder. Cassandra's voice dropped so only Lydia could hear. Tell me, does he visit your chambers, or does he find the whole arrangement too distasteful? I know Dorian. He has particular tastes. I doubt a desperate girl from a bankrupt family satisfies them. The words hit like physical blows. Lydia's hands tightened on the reins. Tempest tossed his head, sensing her tension. What Dorian and I do in private is none of your concern. Oh, but it is. You see, I know him in ways you never will. 3 years ago, we were quite close. He told me things, shared things. Did he tell you about that? About what we meant to each other? Jealousy spiked through Lydia's chest. Irrational, unwanted, but viciously real. She forced it down. If you meant so much to him, why did he refuse to marry you? Cassandra's face went white. Because he's a fool who chose duty over passion, but passion doesn't die just because he married some... She never finished the sentence. Tempest, already agitated by Lydia's tension, spooked at something in the brush. A rabbit, a snake, it didn't matter. The horse reared, and Lydia, her attention divided between Cassandra's venom and staying mounted, lost her grip. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Above her, Tempest's hooves flashed. If one connected with her skull, she'd die. Someone screamed. Then hands grabbed her, dragging her backward just as Tempest came down where she'd been lying. She caught a glimpse of Helena Blackwood's grim face before everything spun. Stay down, Helena commanded. Don't move. The hunt had stopped. Riders circled back, their expressions ranging from concern to poorly concealed satisfaction. Cassandra dismounted with theatrical grace, her face a mask of worry. Duchess Vance! Are you hurt? Oh, how terrible. I tried to warn you that Tempest was unsuitable, but you insisted. I'm fine. Lydia struggled to sit up, pain lancing through her ribs. Nothing broken, probably, but she'd be bruised for weeks. Just winded. You could have been killed. This from Lord Pemberton, his tone suggesting he found the prospect unfortunate. Perhaps next time you'll listen to those with more experience. Lydia looked around at the circle of faces, some concerned, most smugly satisfied. They'd wanted this. Wanted to see her fail, to prove she didn't belong, to confirm their assumptions about the desperate city girl playing Duchess. Cassandra had orchestrated it perfectly. The unsuitable horse, the distraction, the spook. Whether she'd planned every detail or simply seized the opportunity, the result was the same. Lydia had been humiliated, had proven herself incompetent, had reinforced every negative assumption. She could leave, could claim injury and retreat to the estate, could write to Dorian and beg him to come retrieve her, could admit defeat. Helena Blackwood crouched beside her, her voice low. You don't have to stay. No one would blame you for withdrawing. Lydia looked at the older woman, saw both sympathy and challenge in her eyes. No one would blame her, but she'd blame herself. Help me up, Lydia said. You can't be serious. Help me up. Helena complied, her grip strong. Lydia stood on shaking legs, every muscle protesting. Across the clearing, Cassandra's expression shifted from false concern to genuine surprise. Duchess Vance, you're injured. You should return to the estate. I'm fine. Lydia limped toward Tempest, who'd been caught by a stable hand. The horse eyed her warily. You can't possibly intend to continue riding. Why not? Lydia reached for the reins. Her hands shook, but she locked her fingers around the leather. I fell. It happens. But I'm not delicate enough to let one fall in my day. She turned to the stable hand. Help me mount. The man looked at Helena, who nodded. Together they got Lydia back into the saddle. Every movement was agony, but she set her jaw and refused to show it. From horseback, she looked down at Cassandra. Shall we continue? Her voice was steady. I believe we were hunting. For the first time since Lydia had arrived, Cassandra's composure cracked completely. Her eyes blazed with pure hatred, no longer masked by social grace. You stupid, stubborn girl. You could have what? Died? Perhaps. But I didn't. Lydia gathered the reins. And now I'm going to finish this hunt. Unless you'd like to return to the estate yourself, Lady Morven. I understand if the excitement has been too much for you. The insult landed perfectly. Several guests gasped. No one spoke to Cassandra Morven like that, but Cassandra couldn't retreat without losing face. She'd created this situation, positioned herself as the concerned hostess. The experienced rider worried about the novice. If she withdrew now, it would look like cowardice. Of course not, Cassandra said, her voice like ice cracking. Let's continue. The hunt moved on. Lydia clung to Tempest with what felt like her last reserves of strength, pain radiating through her ribs with every stride. But she stayed mounted, stayed moving. And when they finally returned to Ravenwood 3 hours later, she dismounted on her own, albeit carefully, and walked into the estate with her head high. That evening, Lydia skipped dinner. Her ribs hurt too much to face another social battle. She sat in her guest chambers, soaking in a hot bath that turned the water pink from her various scrapes and bruises, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of tears. Then she dried off, dressed for bed, and wrote a letter to Dorian. I survived. Barely. But I didn't break. Your move, Your Grace, she sealed it and sent it with a messenger before she could second-guess herself. 2 days later, when she returned to Vance Hold battered but unbowed, Dorian was waiting in the courtyard. He took one look at her bruised face and rigid posture and said, Cassandra? Cassandra? Did you break? No. Something fierce and approving flashed in his eyes. Good. That night, for the first time since their wedding, he knocked on the connecting door between their chambers. Not for seduction, for conversation. He sat across from her in the small sitting area, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and said, Tell me everything. So she did. Every cut, every insult, every moment of isolation and hostility. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, You did well. Better than I expected. I barely survived. Survival is the first victory. Everything else builds on that. He stood, moved to the window. Cassandra will retaliate again. Harder, now that you've embarrassed her publicly. Are you prepared for that? Lydia thought of the hunting party, of standing despite the pain, of refusing to retreat. Yes, she said. I am. Dorian turned, and for the first time she saw something in his face beyond cold calculation. Respect, yes, but also recognition. The acknowledgement that she was becoming more than the desperate girl he'd purchased. She was becoming a fighter. Then we'll face it together, he said quietly. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection. But it was alliance. And in this harsh northern world, that was worth more than empty promises. Alliance, Lydia learned over the following weeks, was a weapon that cut both ways. Dorian began including her in his morning strategy sessions, dry affairs where officers reported on patrol routes, supply lines, and border skirmishes. She sat in the corner of his war room, silent at first, absorbing the brutal mathematics of frontier governance. How many men to defend which settlement, whether to negotiate with raiders or eliminate them. The constant calculus of lives versus resources. The eastern villages are requesting additional grain stores for winter, Captain Hendricks said, pointing to marks on the map. But our reserves are already stretched. If we give them what they're asking for, we won't have enough for the garrison if we're besieged. Then they get half, Dorian replied without hesitation. Enough to prevent starvation, not enough to waste. Tell them to supplement with hunting and preserved fish. They won't like it. They'll like starving even less. Lydia watched him make these decisions with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything. No sentimentality, no apologies. Just brutal pragmatism that kept people alive even if it didn't make them happy. After the officers left, she asked, "Don't you worry about their resentment? The villages you're asking to make do with less?" Resentment keeps people alive if it motivates them to work harder. Complacency kills. He marked something on the map. This isn't the capital, Lydia. We don't have the luxury of keeping everyone comfortable. We have the luxury of keeping them breathing through winter. That's all. It was harsh. It was also true. And Lydia found herself understanding the logic even as it chilled her. But understanding came with a price. The more she learned about the northern provinces, the more she realized how precarious everything was. Dorian's hold on power wasn't guaranteed by birthright alone. It was maintained through constant vigilance, strategic brutality, and the knowledge that one mistake could cost hundreds of lives. And now, by extension, that weight rested partially on her shoulders too. The awareness was crushing. 3 weeks after Ravenwood, the retaliation Helena Blackwood had predicted arrived in the form of a letter bearing the imperial seal. Dorian read it in silence, his expression darkening with each line. Then he passed it to Lydia without comment. Duke Vance is hereby summoned to the capital to address concerns regarding tax irregularities and reports of excessive force in provincial governance. His presence is required within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in revocation of territorial authority and imperial investigation. Lydia read it twice. This is Cassandra's work. Obviously. Dorian's voice was flat. She has connections at court, enough to manufacture charges and force an inquiry. But you haven't done anything wrong. Wrong is irrelevant. This is political theater. She's trying to undermine my authority by making me look incompetent or corrupt. And by forcing me to leave the territory during winter, she's creating an opportunity for chaos. He took the letter back, his jaw tight. If I go, the northern provinces are vulnerable. If I don't go, I give the imperial government cause to move against me. Then we fight the charges, provide documentation proving... There's no fighting this, Lydia. This isn't about truth. It's about power. Cassandra wants to prove she can hurt me, and she's using imperial bureaucracy as her weapon. He stood, began pacing. I'll have to go. Spend weeks at court playing political games while hoping nothing collapses here. Then I'll manage things while you're gone. He stopped. What? You gave me authority over the household. Expand it. Give me authority over the entire territory in your absence. She met his gaze. You said you needed someone capable of running things when you're away. This is your chance to prove you meant it. Lydia, managing servants and dealing with provincial governance are entirely different. Are they? Both require making decisions people won't like. Both require standing firm against resentment. Both require proving you have the right to command. She stood. You've been training me whether you realized it or not. Let me prove I learned the lessons. If you fail, people die. Settlements fall. Everything I've built collapses. And if you don't trust me with this, you prove to everyone, Cassandra included, that your marriage was exactly what they think, a transaction where you bought a womb, not a partner. Her voice hardened. You want me to be strong enough to represent the Vance name? Then let me represent it. The silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Finally, Dorian said, You understand what you're asking for. The northern families will test you. The villages will resist. Every decision you make will be scrutinized, and any mistake will be used against both of us. I understand. And you're willing to risk that? To stand alone against all of it? She thought of Ravenwood, of refusing to break even when every instinct screamed to retreat, of choosing to fight despite overwhelming odds. I'm not asking for safety, she said. I'm asking for the chance to prove myself, the way you've been proving yourself your entire life. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, respect, maybe even the first hint of actual trust. Very well. He moved to his desk, began writing. I'll draft the orders. You'll have full authority in my absence, accountable only to me. The garrison commanders will report to you. The household, the villages, the trade agreements, all of it falls to you. He looked up. Don't make me regret this. I won't. We'll see. That night, Lydia lay awake in her chambers and wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Taking on responsibility was one thing. Actually fulfilling it was another entirely. But retreat wasn't an option. Not anymore. She'd chosen this path. Now she had to walk it. Dorian left for the capital 6 days later in a carriage weighted down with documentation and legal defenses. Before departing, he assembled the garrison commanders and household staff in the Great Hall. In my absence, Duchess Vance has full authority over all territorial matters, his voice carried to the rafters. Her orders carry the same weight as mine. Disobedience to her is disobedience to me. Do I make myself clear? The assembled crowd murmured acknowledgement, but Lydia saw the skepticism in their eyes, saw the way Captain Hendricks exchanged glances with his fellow officers, saw Mrs. Halford's tight expression. They'd obey because Dorian commanded it, but they didn't believe she could actually lead. After he left, the first test came within hours. Captain Hendricks appeared in her study, Dorian's study, which she'd claimed as her own, with a report about eastern border raids. 3 farms hit last night. Livestock stolen, 1 man killed. The raiders fled north into the mountains. He set the report on her desk. Standard procedure is to send a patrol to track them, but with winter coming, the men are reluctant to chase bandits into high country. Lydia read the report quickly. The farms were small holdings, barely prosperous. The stolen livestock represented their entire winter food supply. Without it, the families would starve. Send the patrol, she said. With respect, Duchess, the Duke usually weighs the cost against the strategic value. 3 small farms are 3 families who depend on us for protection. Send the patrol, Captain. Recover what can be recovered and eliminate the raider camp if possible. Hendrick's expression suggested he thought this was foolish, but he saluted. As you command. After he left, Lydia stared at the map on the wall and wondered if she'd just made her first mistake. Dorian would have calculated differently, would have weighed the risk to his soldiers against the value of 3 poor farms. But Lydia wasn't Dorian, and if she was going to lead, it would have to be on her own terms. The patrol returned 3 days later successful, livestock recovered, raider camp destroyed, minimal casualties. Hendricks reported with barely concealed surprise, and Lydia allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. 1 decision, 1 success. 1,000 more to go. The second test came from the villages. A delegation arrived from the western settlements requesting an audience. Their spokesman was a grizzled farmer named Torvin, who looked at Lydia like she was a child playing dress-up. We need grain, he said bluntly. Your husband promised us reserves for winter, but the stores we received were half what we expected. We can't survive on what you've given us. The reserves are calculated based on population and projected needs, Lydia replied, referencing the documents she'd studied. You received exactly what was allocated. It's not enough. Then supplement with hunting and fishing, as the Duke suggested. Torvin's expression darkened. We're farmers, not hunters, and the Duke would understand. The Duke isn't here. I am. Lydia stood, planting her hands on the desk. The allocation stands. You have what you need to survive if you're willing to adapt. If you're not willing, that's not a resource problem. It's a willingness problem. You can't just, I can, I am. And if you continue to argue, I'll assume you came here to waste my time rather than find solutions. Is that the case, Torvin? The farmer's jaw worked. Behind him, the other delegates shifted uncomfortably. They'd expected sympathy, perhaps concessions. Instead, they'd gotten Dorian's logic delivered in Lydia's voice. No, Duchess, Torvin finally said. We'll make do. Good. Dismissed. After they left, Mrs. Halford appeared in the doorway. That was harsh. That was necessary. They were testing to see if I'd caved to pressure. If I had, every village in the territory would be here tomorrow demanding more than their share. Lydia sat back down. Dorian governs through strength, so will I. You're not Dorian. No, but I'm learning from him. She met the housekeeper's gaze. Do you have a problem with that, Mrs. Halford? For a long moment, the older woman studied her. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. No, my lady, no problem at all. It was the first genuine warmth Lydia had received from her, and it felt like a victory. But victories, she was learning, were temporary things in the north. The real crisis arrived 3 weeks into Dorian's absence, carried by a rider who'd nearly killed his horse getting to the hold. Duchess Vance! The man stumbled into the courtyard, exhausted and wild-eyed. The northern villages, there's been an outbreak, fever. It's spreading fast and people are dying. Lydia's blood went cold. Epidemic disease in winter could devastate entire settlements. How many affected? 20 confirmed cases in Millbrook. More suspected in the surrounding farms. The village healer says it's like nothing she's seen before. Captain Hendricks appeared at her elbow. We need to quarantine immediately. Seal the affected area, prevent anyone from leaving or entering until the fever runs its course. That could take weeks. The villages don't have enough supplies to survive that long. Better some starve than the disease spreads to the entire territory. Lydia's mind raced. Quarantine was logical, brutal, effective. It was exactly what Dorian would do, sacrifice the few to save the many. But these were people, families, children. Prepare the quarantine, she said slowly, but also prepare medical supplies and additional food stores. We're sending aid into the affected area. Hendricks stared at her. Duchess, that's suicide. Anyone who goes in will likely contract the fever. Then we send volunteers, people who understand the risk and choose to take it. No one will volunteer for that. I will. Dead silence in this courtyard. Everyone within earshot turned to stare. Duchess Vance, you can't be serious, Mrs. Halford said. If you die, the entire territory loses its leadership. The Duke will understand that I did what was necessary. Lydia's voice was steady, despite her hammering heart. We can't just abandon those people. If I order quarantine without providing aid, I'm sentencing them to death. I won't do that. Then send supplies with soldiers and ask men to risk their lives for my orders while I stay safe in the hold? No. She turned to the assembled staff and guards. I'm going to Millbrook. I'm bringing medical supplies and food. Anyone who wants to volunteer can come with me. Anyone who doesn't, I understand completely. The courtyard was silent. No one moved. Then Helena Blackwood stepped forward from the crowd. When had she arrived at the hold? And said, I'll go. Lady Blackwood, you don't have to. I served in military hospitals during the Eastern Campaign. I've treated fever before. Helena's expression was grim. You'll need someone who knows what they're doing. Besides, someone needs to keep you from doing anything stupidly heroic. One of the guards stepped forward, then another, then a servant. Within minutes, Lydia had a volunteer force of 15 people. Not many, but enough. Captain Hendricks looked like he wanted to physically restrain her. The Duke will have my head for allowing this. The Duke left me in command. This is my decision. She met his eyes. Prepare the wagons. We leave in 2 hours. The ride to Millbrook took most of the day. The village sat in a valley surrounded by pine forest, normally picturesque but now eerily silent. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys. No one worked in the fields. The village healer met them at the outskirts, her face haggard with exhaustion. Thank the heavens, I didn't think anyone would come. How bad is it? Helena asked, already assessing the woman with a professional eye. 30 sick now, 5 dead. It starts with chills and headache, then high fever and delirium. Some recover after 4 or 5 days. Others... She trailed off. I've tried everything I know. Nothing helps. Helena examined one of the patients, a young woman burning with fever, her skin flushed and dry. This looks like mountain fever. It's carried by ticks, common in high country, usually appears in summer though. Is it treatable? With aggressive cooling and fluid management, most people survive, but it requires constant care. Helena straightened. We need to set up a treatment area, separate the sick from the healthy. Anyone showing symptoms goes into isolation immediately. They worked through the night. Lydia found herself doing tasks she'd never imagined, bathing feverish patients with cold water, forcing fluids down delirious throats, changing soiled bedding. It was grueling, intimate, utterly unglamorous work, and it was necessary. By the 3rd day, the fever's spread had slowed. By the 5th, the first patients began to recover. Helena's treatment protocols worked, not perfectly, but well enough. The death count stayed at 7, tragic but far less than the dozens it could have been. But Lydia paid a price for her intervention. On the 6th day, she woke with chills. By afternoon, the fever had her in its grip. Helena found her trying to work despite violent shaking. You stubborn fool. You should have told me the moment you felt symptoms. Too much to do, Lydia managed through chattering teeth. Nothing more important than staying alive. Helena practically carried her to an isolation tent. You're going into treatment, and you're going to follow every single order I give you, or I swear I'll write to your husband and tell him his duchess died of stubbornness. The next days blurred into fever dream fragments, heat that felt like burning alive, cold that penetrated bone deep, Helena's face swimming above her, forcing water down her throat, voices arguing somewhere distant about whether to send for Dorian. At some point, Lydia became convinced she was dying. The fever peaked, and she felt herself slipping away, consciousness fraying at the edges. Then, through the delirium, she heard a voice, familiar, furious. You idiotic, reckless, magnificent woman. Dorian. He was supposed to be at the capital. But when she forced her eyes open, there he was, travel-stained, exhausted, his face carved with worry and rage. You're supposed to be at court, she whispered. I left the moment I heard what you'd done. The charges be damned. His hand touched her forehead, checking her temperature. Did you think I'd stay there playing politics while you died in some plague village? You said I was on my own. I said you'd have to fight your battles yourself. I never said I'd let you die alone. His voice cracked just slightly. Though I may kill you myself once you recover for scaring me like this. Helena appeared behind him. She's through the worst of it. Fever broke an hour ago. She'll survive. Of course I will, Lydia managed, too stubborn to die. Dorian's laugh was shaky. Yes, you are. He stood. Rest. We'll talk when you're stronger. But before he left, he did something unexpected. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. Not a kiss of passion, but of profound relief. It was the first genuine affection he'd ever shown her. Lydia fell asleep with the warmth of it settling in her chest. Recovery took another week. During that time, the quarantine lifted, the village began returning to normal, and Lydia learned, to her shock, that her actions had created ripples far beyond Millbrook. The northern villages are calling you the Duchess who didn't flee, Helena told her. It's spreading through the territory. The story of the city girl who risked her life for farmers she'd never met. That's absurd. I did what anyone would. Anyone wouldn't, that's the point. Helena smiled. You could have ordered quarantine and stayed safe. You chose differently, and people remember that. When Lydia was finally strong enough to travel, Dorian insisted on personally escorting her back to the hold. During the journey, he explained what had happened at court. Cassandra's charges were nonsense, as expected, but dealing with them required time and political maneuvering. His jaw tightened. Then I received word about the outbreak, about what you'd done. I abandoned the proceedings immediately. The charges are still pending. I'll have to return eventually, but for now, He looked at her. What you did was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I haven't decided which. Can it be both? Knowing you? Probably. He was quiet for a moment. The northern families are divided now. Half think you're a fool. The other half think you're a leader worth following. Cassandra's influence is weakening because you've proven that strength comes in forms other than social manipulation. Good. Let her choke on it. Dorian smiled, a real smile, rare and startling. Bloodthirsty. I like it. When they reached the hold, something had changed. The staff assembled to greet them, but this time their expressions held respect instead of skepticism. Mrs. Halford actually curtsied properly. Captain Hendricks saluted with genuine deference. They'd seen her risk everything, and they'd accepted her as one of their own. That night, Dorian knocked on the connecting door between their chambers again. But this time, when Lydia opened it, his expression held something new. I need to tell you something, he said, about Cassandra. Lydia stepped back, letting him enter. All right. What she said at Ravenwood, about us being close, it wasn't entirely a lie. He moved to the window, his back to her. 3 years ago, we had an arrangement. Not romantic, but physical. Convenience for both of us. Jealousy flared, but Lydia pushed it down. Why are you telling me this? Because she's going to use it against you eventually, and I wanted you to hear it from me first. He turned. It ended badly. She wanted marriage. I wanted independence. She's hated me ever since. And now she hates me by extension. Yes. His eyes held hers. But what you need to understand is that whatever I had with Cassandra was transactional. It meant nothing beyond the physical release. What we have, he paused, searching for words. What we're building, it's different. Is it? Lydia's voice was soft. We started as a transaction too. We did, but somewhere between your stubborn refusal to break at Ravenwood and your idiotic decision to walk into a plague village, it became something else. He stepped closer. I didn't expect to respect you, Lydia. Didn't expect to trust you with my territory. Didn't expect to ride through the night terrified that I'd arrive too late. Her breath caught. Dorian, I'm not good at this, at feelings or declarations or any of the soft things people expect, but I need you to know. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and solid. You're not property. Not anymore. Maybe you never were, despite what the contract said. Your partner, she finished. Yes, my partner. His thumb traced circles on her palm. If you want to be. In answer, Lydia closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. That had been at their wedding, perfunctory and meaningless. This was different. This was choosing him not from desperation, but from genuine feeling, from the trust they'd built through conflict and survival. When they broke apart, Dorian rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, and the sound was free, unguarded. Then he kissed her again, and this time it led to more. To the consummation their marriage had always required, but now carried meaning beyond mere obligation. Afterward, lying in his bed with his arms around her, Lydia felt something settle in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the foundation for it. The trust and respect that made love possible. We're going to face Cassandra again, Dorian said quietly. She won't forgive any of this. Ravenwood, your success with the outbreak, my abandoning court for you. She'll come at us harder. Then we'll face her together. Together, he agreed. Neither of them knew that Cassandra's retaliation was already in motion, that a rider had left Ravenwood days ago carrying a message to the imperial court, that charges far more serious than tax irregularities were being prepared, that the real battle was just beginning. But for this one night, they allowed themselves peace, allowed themselves to believe that what they'd built might be strong enough to survive whatever came next. Outside, winter wind howled through the hold's corridors. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of the Northern Marches slept in each other's arms, and for the first time since their marriage began, neither was alone. The summons arrived a week later. Not for Dorian this time. For Lydia. She opened the letter in Dorian's presence, her hand steady despite the imperial seal. Read the words once, then again, unable to process what she was seeing. Lydia Catherine Vance, Duchess of the Northern Marches, is hereby summoned to the imperial court to answer charges of medical malpractice resulting in death, unauthorized use of military resources, and conduct unbecoming of her station. Her presence is required within 20 days. How? Her voice failed. Dorian took the letter, his face going white as he read. The 7 who died. She's claiming you caused their deaths through incompetent treatment, that you should have maintained quarantine instead of intervening. That's insane. We saved lives. She's twisted it, made it look like arrogance, like a city girl playing healer and killing people through ignorance. His hands crushed the parchment. And the unauthorized use of military resources. You took volunteers, but technically you commandeered garrison supplies without imperial approval. You gave me authority over the territory, not over life and death medical decisions, not over resources earmarked for defense. He was pacing now, his control fracturing. She's found the gap in my delegation of authority and exploited it. Legally, she has a case. Lydia sat down heavily. After everything, after surviving Ravenwood, after risking her life for the villages, after finally finding her place here, Cassandra had found a way to destroy her anyway. What happens if I'm found guilty? Dorian's silence was answer enough. I'll be stripped of my title, Lydia said slowly. Possibly imprisoned. The marriage could be annulled. I won't let that happen. You might not have a choice. She looked up at him. This is Imperial Court. They have jurisdiction over noble conduct. If they rule against me, then I go to war with the Empire itself. His voice was granite. I will not let them take you. That's suicide. You'd lose everything. I don't care. He pulled her to her feet, his hands gripping her shoulders. Do you understand? I don't care. Whatever it costs, I will not let Cassandra win. I will not let them break you. For the first time, Lydia saw desperation in his eyes. Not the cold calculation, not the strategic mind, just raw, furious desperation. And she realized with startling clarity, he loved her. Maybe he didn't have words for it yet. Maybe he didn't even fully recognize it himself. But he loved her enough to burn the world for her. The knowledge should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. Because if Dorian went to war with the Empire on her behalf, he'd destroy everything he'd built. And she'd be the reason for it. She couldn't let that happen. No, she said firmly. You're not sacrificing yourself for me. We fight this legally. We prove the charges are false. We win the right way. And if we can't? She thought of all the impossible things she'd already survived. Her family's collapse, the hostile hold, Ravenwood, the fever that had nearly killed her. She'd survived by being stubborn, strategic, and willing to fight when fight was the only option. This would be no different. Then we make them regret ever giving Cassandra Morven the power to charge me, Lydia said, her voice cold as northern winter. We go to court. We defend ourselves. And we prove that a desperate city girl can beat their entire system. Dorian stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. You really are magnificent when you're angry. I learned from the best. Flattery won't save you from imperial prosecution. No. She straightened, squaring her shoulders. But I will. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall. The first real storm of winter. In the courtyard below, guards moved through their drills, unaware that their duchess had just been charged with crimes that could end her life. Lydia watched the snow accumulate and felt something crystallize inside her. Not fear. Not despair. Determination. Cassandra wanted to destroy her through the courts? Fine. Lydia would meet her there, would fight with every weapon she possessed, intelligence, will, and the stubborn refusal to break that had defined her since this entire ordeal began. She'd signed a contract to save her family. She'd survived hostile nobility. She'd walked into plague villages and emerged alive. She would survive this too. 20 days, she said. We have 20 days to prepare a defense. Then we'd better get started. Dorian moved to his desk, already pulling out legal documents. Because I promise you this, Lydia, Cassandra Morven has made her last move against us. Win or lose, this ends at court. In the firelight, surrounded by maps and legal papers, the Duke and Duchess of the Northern Marches began to plan their war. Neither knew that in a capital estate hundreds of miles away, Cassandra Morvan was planning too, gathering allies, preparing witnesses, crafting the perfect trap. She'd tried social humiliation. She'd tried physical danger. Now she'd use the full weight of imperial law to crush the woman who dared to challenge her. And she was very, very good at winning. The stage was set, the players assembled, the final battle was coming, and only one woman could survive it. The preparation consumed them completely. Dorian's war room transformed into a legal battlefield, documents stacked in precise columns, witness statements spread across tables, every piece of evidence cataloged with military precision. They worked 18-hour days, pausing only when exhaustion made the words blur. The key to their case is the 7 deaths, Dorian said on the third night, his voice hoarse from hours of argument rehearsal. Cassandra's lawyers will claim you caused them through incompetent intervention, that a proper quarantine would have prevented any fatalities. Which is impossible to prove either way. Lydia rubbed her eyes. We can't know what would have happened if I'd done nothing. No, but we can prove what did happen because of your actions. 30 sick, only 7 dead. That's a 77% survival rate. Helena's written testimony confirms that mountain fever typically kills 40 to 50% of those infected without treatment. He tapped the document. Your intervention saved lives. We have numbers to prove it. Will they care about numbers? Or will they care that a duchess overstepped her authority? They'll care about what makes them look good. If we can frame your actions as heroic rather than reckless, we shift the narrative. He leaned back, studying her. The question is whether you can stand in front of the imperial court and defend yourself without breaking. Because they'll tear into you, Lydia. They'll make Cassandra's social cruelty look gentle by comparison. She met his gaze. I stood through Ravenwood. I'll stand through this. Ravenwood was provincial politics. This is the empire. His expression was grim. But if anyone can survive it, you can. The faith in his voice steadied her more than any strategy could. On the 5th day, Helena Blackwood arrived at the hold with unexpected news. She strode into the war room without preamble, dropping a leather satchel on the table. I've been gathering statements from the Millbrook survivors, she announced. Every family you helped. Every person who would have died without your intervention. 32 written testimonies, all willing to travel to court and testify on your behalf. Lydia stared at the satchel. They'd do that? You risked your life for them. Of course they'll risk their time for you. Helena's smile was fierce. Cassandra is expecting you to stand alone. She's not expecting an army of farmers to show up and call her a liar. The court won't care what farmers think. The court will care about public opinion, and 32 witnesses saying you saved their lives is powerful testimony, regardless of their station. Helena pulled out one of the letters, handed it to Lydia. Read it. The letter was written in rough script, clearly laboriously composed. Your Grace, my name is Mara. You bathed my fever and made me drink when I wanted to die. You held my hand and told me to fight. I lived because you didn't give up on me. If they say you did wrong, they lie. I will stand with you. We all will. Lydia's throat tightened. She'd been so focused on legal strategy that she'd forgotten the human element, the people whose lives had meaning beyond statistics. This changes things, Dorian said quietly. He was reading another letter, his expression unreadable. If we bring these people to court, we turn this from a legal argument into a moral one. We force the judges to acknowledge that real lives were saved. It's risky, Helena warned. Cassandra will attack their credibility, call them biased, simple, incapable of understanding the legal nuances. Let her try. Lydia set the letter down carefully. If she attacks farmers for being grateful to the person who saved them, she'll look like exactly what she is, cruel and disconnected from reality. Then we use them. Dorian began reorganizing their defense strategy. We build the case on 3 pillars: legal authority, medical necessity, and human impact. The legal argument establishes that you acted within the scope of authority I granted you. The medical testimony proves your intervention saved lives. And the witnesses provide the emotional weight that makes it undeniable. For the first time since the summons arrived, Lydia felt something like hope. But hope, she was learning, was a dangerous thing to hold too tightly. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. A rider arrived from the capital bearing a second letter, this one addressed to Dorian. He opened it at the dinner table, his face going progressively darker as he read. "What is it?" Lydia asked. "A counter summons. I'm being charged with neglect of duty for abandoning the original court proceedings to return to the territory." He set the letter down with controlled precision. "If I attend your trial, I'll be arrested for contempt of imperial summons." The words hit like a physical blow. "They're trying to separate us." "Of course they are. Together we're strong, alone we're vulnerable." His jaw clenched. "This is Cassandra's real strategy. She knows you can defend yourself if I'm there to support you, so she's arranged to remove me from the equation entirely. Then we need another strategy." "There is no other strategy. If I attend your trial, I'm arrested. If I don't attend, you face the court alone." Lydia's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Then slowly, an idea began to form. Dangerous, unconventional, possibly suicidal. "What if we use their separation against them?" she said slowly. "Explain." "Cassandra wants me isolated because she thinks I'm weak alone. But what if I prove I'm not? What if I stand trial without you and win anyway?" She leaned forward. "It would prove to everyone, the court, the northern families, the empire itself, that I'm not just your shadow, that I have power in my own right. It would also leave you completely exposed. I was exposed at Ravenwood. I survived. I was exposed in Millbrook. I survived that too." Her voice hardened. "I've been underestimated my entire life. Let Cassandra underestimate me one more time. It'll be her last mistake." Dorian stared at her for a long moment. "You understand what you're proposing? Walking into imperial court alone, facing professional prosecutors and a judge who's likely already been bought?" "Yes. And you're willing to risk everything on your ability to outmaneuver them?" "I'm willing to risk everything on the truth, and on the stubbornness that's kept me alive this long." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "You taught me to be strategic, to be ruthless when necessary, to protect what's mine. Now let me prove I learned the lessons." His grip tightened on her hand. If it fails, I'll face the consequences. But I won't fail." She met his eyes. "Trust me." The word hung between them, weighted with everything they'd built. Trust was what had turned their contract into something real. Trust was what had made them partners instead of strangers bound by obligation. "I do trust you," Dorian said finally, "more than I've trusted anyone. But that doesn't make this less terrifying." "Good. Terror means we still have something to lose." She squeezed his hand. "Help me prepare. Make me sharp enough to cut through their entire case, and then let me fight." For the next 12 days, they worked like soldiers preparing for battle. Dorian drilled her on imperial law, on courtroom procedure, on the subtle language that could destroy or save a legal argument. Helena coached her on remaining calm under hostile questioning. Mrs. Halford helped her select clothing that projected authority without arrogance. And at night, alone in their shared chambers, Dorian held her and whispered strategies until they both fell asleep exhausted. The intimacy they'd discovered had deepened into something profound. Not just physical, though that remained intense, but emotional. The kind of partnership where each understood the other's thoughts before they were spoken. Where silence was comfortable and presence was enough. "I love you," Dorian said one night, the words escaping almost involuntarily. Lydia turned in his arms, studying his face in the firelight. He looked terrified of the admission, as if love was more dangerous than any battlefield. "I know," she said softly. "I love you too." "Then don't die in that courtroom." "I won't. I have too much to come back to." She meant it, and the certainty in her voice seemed to ease something in him. On the morning of departure, the entire hold assembled to see her off. Not just the household staff, but villagers who'd traveled from across the territory. Farmers from Millbrook. Soldiers from the garrison. People she'd governed, protected, risked her life for. Torven, the farmer who'd challenged her grain allocation, stepped forward with a rough bundle. "For luck, Your Grace. From all of us." Inside was a cloak woven from northern wool, dyed the deep green of the Vance colors. Heavy, warm, made with obvious care. "We know you'll face them alone," Torvin said gruffly. "But you carry all of us with you. Remember that." Lydia's vision blurred. She managed a nod, wrapping the cloak around her shoulders. It smelled like wood smoke and pine, like the territory she'd learned to call home. Dorian walked her to the carriage. At the door, he pulled her into an embrace that felt like both goodbye and promise. "Win," he whispered against her hair. "I will. And come back to me. Always." The kiss they shared was witnessed by everyone assembled, and Lydia didn't care. Let them see. Let everyone know that the Duke and Duchess of the Northern Marches were united in more than name. Then she climbed into the carriage, and the journey to the capital began. The imperial capital was everything the Northern Territories weren't: warm, crowded, glittering with wealth and excess. Buildings rose in ornate splendor, streets teemed with merchants and nobles, and everywhere Lydia looked she saw the soft luxury that had nearly destroyed her family. She'd once belonged here. Now it felt alien. The trial was set for 3 days after her arrival, giving her time to settle into a modest inn and review her defense one final time. Helena had traveled with her, along with the Millbrook witnesses, and together they prepared in the cramped inn rooms like generals planning a siege. "The prosecutor is Lord Harwick," Helena reported after gathering intelligence. "Known for being brutal in cross-examination. He'll try to rattle you, make you seem hysterical or incompetent." "Then I'll be neither. Cassandra will be there, sitting in the gallery, watching. She'll want to see you break. She'll be disappointed." On the morning of the trial, Lydia dressed with deliberate care. The green dress from Beatrice, elegant and severe. The Vance emerald at her throat, marking her as family. The northern cloak from the villagers, a reminder of who she fought for. She looked in the mirror and saw not a desperate girl sold into marriage, but a duchess who'd earned her title through fire. The courthouse was a massive marble edifice designed to intimidate. Inside, the gallery was packed. Nobility who'd come to watch the spectacle, journalists documenting every moment, and there, in the front row, with a satisfied smile, Cassandra Morven. Their eyes met across the room. Cassandra's smile widened, triumphant and cruel. Lydia smiled back, cold, controlled, promising retribution. The judge entered. Lord Chancellor Pemberton, no relation to the sneering lord from Ravenwood, but cut from the same cloth. Elderly, stern, with the kind of face that suggested he'd never smiled in his life. "This court is convened to address charges against Duchess Lydia Vance," he intoned. "Medical malpractice resulting in death, unauthorized use of military resources, and conduct unbecoming of her station. How does the defendant plead?" Lydia stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor. On all counts." "Then let us proceed. Lord Harwick, present your case." The prosecutor rose, a sharp-faced man in expensive robes, every inch the legal predator. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Duchess Vance, a woman with no medical training and minimal experience in governance, took it upon herself to override established quarantine protocols and intervene directly in a disease outbreak. Her actions resulted in 7 deaths that proper containment would have prevented. Furthermore, she commandeered military supplies without authorization, exceeding her delegated authority in a manner that endangered the entire Northern Territory. He painted a picture of arrogance and incompetence, of a city girl playing duchess and getting people killed through her ignorance. Every word was calculated to make Lydia seem foolish, reckless, unfit for the responsibility she'd claimed. The gallery murmured. Cassandra looked pleased. Then it was Lydia's turn. She stood, and the room fell silent. She wore no wig, employed no lawyer to speak for her, just herself, her voice, and the truth. "Your Honor, I won't dispute the facts Lord Harwick has presented. I did intervene in the Millbrook outbreak. I did use garrison supplies. I did act without waiting for imperial approval." She paused, letting that sink in. "What I dispute is the characterization of those actions as criminal." "The law is clear," Harwick began. "The law is clear," Lydia interrupted smoothly, "that a duchess has authority over her territory in her husband's absence. Duke Vance granted me full administrative authority before departing for the capital. I exercised that authority to address a crisis that could have devastated the entire northern region if left unchecked. You had no medical training. I had Lady Helena Blackwood, a trained military physician with extensive experience treating epidemic disease. I deferred to her medical judgment while providing the resources and leadership necessary to implement her treatment protocols. Lydia gestured to Helena in the gallery. Perhaps the court would like to hear from an actual medical expert rather than a prosecutor with no understanding of disease management. Several gallery members laughed. The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. Lady Blackwood, he said, approach the bench. Helena stood and delivered testimony with clinical precision. She explained mountain fever's mortality rate, the treatment protocols they'd employed, the lives saved through aggressive intervention. Her credibility was unassailable, a decorated military physician with decades of experience. In your professional opinion, the judge asked, did Duchess Vance's actions save lives or cost lives? They saved lives, Your Honor. Without intervention, we would have lost between 12 and 15 people based on historical mortality rates. Instead, we lost 7. That's a success, not a failure. But 7 people still died under her care. 7 people died from disease, Your Honor, not from treatment. The Duchess didn't kill anyone, the fever did. She simply reduced the death toll as much as medically possible. Harik tried to discredit Helena, to suggest bias or incompetence. He failed spectacularly. Helena had treated epidemics in 3 different campaigns and had the documentation to prove every claim. When she stepped down, Lydia could see Harwick reassessing his strategy. Your Honor, he said, shifting tactics, even if we accept that Lady Blackwood's medical intervention was sound, the fact remains that Duchess Vance exceeded her authority. She commandeered military resources earmarked for territorial defense. She placed garrison personnel at risk. She made unilateral decisions that could have jeopardized the entire region's security. I made decisions, Lydia corrected, that prioritized the lives of the people I was entrusted to protect. Isn't that what governance is supposed to be? Protecting your people? Not at the expense of legal authority. Legal authority exists to serve people, not to let them die while we wait for paperwork. Her voice rang through the courtroom. 30 people were sick. 7 died despite our best efforts. But 23 lived because I chose to act instead of hiding behind protocol. If that's criminal, then I'm guilty. But I'd make the same choice again. The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge hammered for silence. Duchess Vance, he said carefully, the law requires that you follow proper channels, that you wait for authorization before deploying resources. The law also requires that those in power protect their people. I had authority over the territory. I used it to save lives. If the court believes I should have let people die while waiting for imperial approval, then we have very different definitions of justice. It was a gamble, challenging the court's priorities directly. But Lydia had learned from Dorian that sometimes the best defense was offense. The judge was silent for a long moment. Then, do you have witnesses to support your claims about the outbreak's severity? I have 32, Your Honor. Every person from Millbrook who survived the fever, all willing to testify. Cassandra's face went white. Over the next 2 hours, witnesses cycled through, farmers and villagers who described the terror of the outbreak, the desperation before help arrived, the exhaustion and skill Lydia had shown while treating them. They were simple people, not eloquent, but their gratitude was unmistakable. Mara, the woman who'd written the letter, stood before the court with tears streaming down her face. Your Grace held my hand when I thought I'd die. She didn't have to. She could have stayed safe in her castle. But she came. She cared. And I'm alive because of it. Harik tried to dismiss them as biased, as incapable of understanding the legal issues. But their testimony created a narrative he couldn't overcome. A duchess who'd risked everything for people who meant nothing to her strategic interests. By the time the last witness finished, the gallery's mood had shifted. People were whispering, reassessing. Cassandra looked murderous. The judge called a recess. Lydia stood in a side chamber with Helena, both of them tense with anticipation. You did well, Helena said. Better than well? You turned their case into a moral indictment of itself. But will it be enough? We'll know soon. When court reconvened, the judge's expression was unreadable. I've considered the evidence presented by both sides. The law is clear that Duchess Vance exceeded certain procedural requirements. However, the law also recognizes that crisis situations require flexibility and governance. Lydia's heart hammered. The deaths at Millbrook were tragic, but the evidence suggests they resulted from disease, not from incompetent treatment. Indeed, the medical testimony indicates that Duchess Vance's intervention likely prevented additional casualties. He paused. As for the unauthorized use of resources, Duke Vance had granted his wife administrative authority over the territory. While she perhaps should have sought additional approval for military deployment, her actions were within the reasonable scope of that delegation. Cassandra stood abruptly, her face twisted with rage. "Your Honor, this is absurd! Lady Morven, you will sit down or be removed from this courtroom." Cassandra sat, but her eyes promised murder. "I find Duchess Lydia Vance not guilty of medical malpractice," the judge continued. "Not guilty of unauthorized resource deployment. As for conduct unbecoming of her station," he looked directly at Lydia, "I find that risking one's life to save others is perhaps the most becoming conduct possible for a person of noble rank. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted, some cheering, some protesting. Everyone talking at once. Lydia stood frozen, unable to process that it was over, that she'd won. Helena grabbed her in a fierce embrace. "You did it! You magnificent, stubborn woman! You did it!" Across the room, Cassandra shoved through the crowd and disappeared, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Lydia had won. Not just the trial, but the war. She'd proven that she wasn't weak, wasn't incompetent, wasn't the desperate girl Cassandra had tried to destroy. She was the Duchess of the Northern Marches, and everyone knew it now. The journey back to the territory took 4 days. Lydia spent them in a haze of exhaustion and relief, barely processing that the nightmare was over. But as the carriage crested the final hill and Vance Hold came into view, her heart began to race for a different reason. Dorian stood in the courtyard, clearly having watched for her arrival. The moment the carriage stopped, he was there, wrenching open the door and pulling her into his arms with a desperation that spoke of weeks of worry. "You won," he breathed against her hair. "The messenger arrived yesterday. You won." "I won," she confirmed, and then she was laughing and crying at once, the tension finally breaking. He kissed her there in the courtyard, in front of everyone, and she kissed him back with all the love and relief and triumph surging through her. When they finally broke apart, she found the entire hold assembled, staff, soldiers, villagers who'd traveled to welcome her home. They were cheering, applauding, celebrating. Mrs. Halford stepped forward, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Well done, Your Grace. Well done." That night, in their private chambers, Dorian made love to her with a reverence that felt like worship. Afterward, lying tangled together in the firelight, he said, "I was terrified I'd lose you." "You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to let anyone take me away from here." She traced patterns on his chest. "This is home now. Your home. Then we need to talk about the future." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "What future?" "The one where we stop waiting for the next crisis and start building something permanent." His hand covered hers over his heart. "I want a real marriage, Lydia. Not a contract, not an arrangement. A partnership built on choice, not necessity." "We already have that." "Then I want it formalized. New vows, public ones, where we choose each other in front of everyone." His eyes were serious. "I want the world to know that you're not my purchased bride. You're my equal, my partner, my love." Lydia's throat tightened with emotion. "You romantic fool." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She kissed him softly. "Though we should probably deal with Cassandra first. She's not going to take this loss quietly." "Let her try whatever she wants. She failed to destroy you legally, failed to break you socially, failed at every turn." His smile was predatory. "And now everyone knows it. Her power in the northern provinces is broken. Ours is just beginning." He was right. The trial hadn't just vindicated Lydia, it had established her as a force in her own right. The whispers would change now, not the desperate girl who married for money, but the Duchess who risked her life for her people. It was a kind of power money couldn't buy and titles couldn't grant. It was earned, hard-won, real. "We should write to my parents," Lydia said. "Tell them what happened. Let them know I'm all right." "Already done. I sent a letter the day the verdict arrived. Dorian pulled her closer. They're proud of you, as they should be. In the morning, Lydia woke to find a letter had arrived during the night. She recognized the handwriting immediately, her father's shaky script. My dearest daughter, the news of your trial and victory has reached us even here in our coastal exile. Your mother weeps with joy and pride. I weep with shame that I put you in a position where such strength was necessary, but weep also with gratitude that you not only survived, but thrived. You saved our family through sacrifice I had no right to ask of you. And then you saved yourself through courage I never knew you possessed. I am humbled by the woman you've become. Your mother sends her love. I send my apologies and my pride. Your father Lydia read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in her desk. The relationship with her father would never be simple. His choices had cost her too much. But the acknowledgement mattered. Forgiveness, perhaps? Eventually. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Halford entered with a breakfast tray and surprising news. Your Grace, there are visitors requesting an audience. Representatives from 3 northern families. They're asking about winter trade agreements and defensive alliances. Lydia looked up sharply. Which families? Ashford, Blackwood, and Terence. All powerful estates, all previously aligned with Lady Morven. The significance wasn't lost on her. These families were abandoning Cassandra's influence and seeking alliance with the Vances instead. Tell them I'll meet with them this afternoon. And Mrs. Halford, prepare the formal reception room. Let's show them how the Northern Marches does business. The housekeeper smiled. With pleasure, Your Grace. When Dorian heard about the meetings, his expression turned calculating. They're circling because you've proven yourself strong. They want to align with power, and you've demonstrated that you have it. Then we use it. We build the alliances you need to solidify control over the northern provinces. Lydia moved to the maps on his desk. What terms are you willing to offer? They spent the morning strategizing like the partners they'd become. By afternoon, when the northern families arrived, Lydia met them not as a nervous newcomer, but as the Duchess who'd beaten imperial prosecution. The negotiations were sharp, efficient, successful. By evening, they'd secured 3 new trade agreements and a defensive pact that significantly strengthened the territory's position. You're better at this than I expected, Dorian said after the last family departed. I learned from watching you, and from realizing that power is just leverage applied correctly. She smiled. Though I prefer negotiation to threats. Different tools for different situations. The key is knowing which to use when. He pulled her close. We make a good team. We do. That night, as they reviewed the day's victories, a final message arrived from the capital. Not a summons this time, an invitation to the Imperial Winter Gala, where the Empire's most powerful families gathered. An invitation addressed to both of them, acknowledging them as a united force. Cassandra will be there, Lydia said, reading the elegant script. Undoubtedly, but so will we. Dorian's smile was cold. And this time, when she tries to strike, we'll be ready. Together. Always together. Outside the window, the first real snow of winter fell in heavy curtains, blanketing the hold in white silence. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of the Northern Marches planned their next move. Their partnership forged stronger through every trial they'd survived. The desperate contract that had brought them together was long forgotten. What remained was choice, trust, love earned through fire, and a shared determination that no enemy, not Cassandra, not the Empire, not anyone, would ever break what they'd built. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time since this all began, Lydia felt certain they would win, because they weren't fighting alone anymore. They were fighting as one. The journey to the Imperial Winter Gala took them back through landscapes Lydia had traveled twice before, first as a desperate bride, then as a woman fighting for her life. Now she rode as something else entirely, a duchess who'd earned her title through fire and refused to be broken by anyone. The carriage was warmer this time, lined with furs against the winter cold. Dorian sat across from her reviewing intelligence reports, but his hand rested on her knee, a casual intimacy that would have been unthinkable months ago. Cassandra will have allies at the gala, he said, without looking up from his papers. Families who supported her charges against you. They'll be looking for revenge. Let them look. Lydia adjusted the Vance emerald at her throat. I'm not the same woman they tried to destroy. No, you're not. He set the reports aside, studying her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. But they'll try anyway. We need to be prepared for their strategy. What strategy can they possibly have left? I was acquitted. The charges were dismissed. The court ruled in my favor. Legal victory doesn't erase social resentment. They'll attack differently, through gossip, social exclusion, subtle humiliation, the kind of warfare Cassandra excels at. His expression darkened. She won't come at you directly. She's too smart for that. But she'll poison the well, turn public opinion, make you seem like an upstart who got lucky rather than a leader who earned respect. Lydia considered this. He was right. Courtroom victory was one thing, social acceptance another entirely. The capital's elite wouldn't forgive her for surviving. They'd see her triumph as an affront to their power structure. Then we change the narrative before they can, she said slowly. We don't just attend the gala, we dominate it. We show them that the Northern Marches isn't some backwater province they can dismiss. We make them respect us. And how do you propose we do that? A plan was forming in her mind, audacious and risky. We host a reception before the gala itself. We invite the Northern families who've aligned with us, Ashford, Blackwood, Terrence, and the moderates who haven't committed to either side. We make it the event everyone wants to attend. Dorian's eyebrows rose. You want to compete directly with Cassandra for social dominance? I want to make it clear that the northern provinces have new leadership, that we're a force to be reckoned with, not just militarily, but politically and socially. She leaned forward. Cassandra's power comes from being the social arbiter of the North. We take that away from her, and she has nothing left. It's bold, possibly reckless. His mouth curved into a smile. I love it. Over the next week, as they settled into their capital residence, Lydia threw herself into planning with the same strategic focus she'd brought to everything else. She enlisted Helena Blackwood's help. The military physician had connections throughout the northern families and knew exactly who mattered. You'll need to make a statement, Helena advised as they reviewed the guest list. Something that shows you're not just surviving in this world, but reshaping it. I have an idea about that. Lydia pulled out a letter she'd been drafting. What if we announced a new initiative for the Northern Territories? Something that benefits everyone and positions us as forward-thinking leaders? What kind of initiative? Medical training. After Millbrook, it's clear that rural areas need better access to healthcare. What if we established a program to train village healers? Funded by the Northern families collectively, coordinated through Vance Hold. She met Helena's eyes. It would save lives and create a network of loyalty throughout the region. Helena's expression shifted from skeptical to impressed. That's brilliant. It addresses a real need while building political capital. And it frames you as someone who cares about practical solutions rather than just power games. Exactly. And it's something Cassandra could never counter. She's never shown interest in anything beyond social manipulation. This makes her look frivolous by comparison. They worked for days refining the proposal. Dorian contributed strategic insights about which families would support it and how to structure the funding. By the time the reception night arrived, they had a plan that was both politically savvy and genuinely beneficial. The venue they'd chosen was smaller than the imperial ballrooms where Cassandra held court, but Lydia had transformed it into something magical. Northern aesthetics rather than capital excess. Evergreen boughs and winter flowers, silver and deep green everywhere, warmth without ostentation. It felt like the hold itself had been transported south, strong, beautiful, uncompromising. Guests began arriving at sunset. The northern families came in force, Ashford and Blackwood leading, followed by Terrence and others who'd watched Lydia's trial with growing respect. Even some moderate capital families appeared, curious about the Duchess, who'd beaten imperial prosecution. Cassandra, notably, was not invited. The insult was deliberate and public. Lydia received guests in a gown that Beatrice had created specifically for this night, deep forest green silk with silver embroidery that caught the light like frost. The Vance emerald at her throat. Her hair swept up to expose the strong line of her neck and shoulders. She looked like northern royalty, and she carried herself like it. Duchess Vance, Lord Ashford greeted her warmly. Your triumph at court has been the talk of the northern provinces. We're honored to support your leadership. The honor is mine, Lord Ashford. The Northern family's strength comes from unity. I'm simply working to ensure we present that unity to the capital. The carefully rehearsed words landed perfectly. Other guests murmured approval. As the reception progressed, Lydia moved through the crowd with Dorian at her side. They were magnetic together, his cold authority balanced by her warmth, her strategic mind complementing his military precision. Guests gravitated toward them, drawn by the power they radiated as a unit. Midway through the evening, Lydia called for attention. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for attending tonight," she began, her voice carrying clearly. "I know many of you were skeptical when I first came north. A city girl with no experience, married for money, clearly out of her depth." She paused, letting them absorb the blunt acknowledgement. "You were right to be skeptical. I was out of my depth. But I learned. And in learning, I discovered something important about the Northern Territories." She had everyone's complete attention now. "We're strong. We survive conditions that would break softer regions. We protect our own with fierce loyalty. But we've been fractured, divided into individual estates competing for resources and influence. Tonight, I want to propose something different." She gestured to Helena. "Lady Blackwood and I have developed a program to train village healers throughout the Northern Territories. Funded collectively by our families, it would ensure that no settlement faces disease without skilled help, that no family loses loved ones to preventable illness." The room buzzed with reaction. This was unprecedented, collective action on this scale, proposed by someone who'd been dismissed as irrelevant just months ago. "The Millbrook outbreak taught me that leadership isn't about social games or political maneuvering. It's about protecting people, making their lives better, building something that lasts beyond individual ambition." Her eyes swept the crowd. "I'm asking you to join me in building that future. Not for glory or power, but because it's the right thing to do." The silence that followed was profound. Then Lord Ashford stepped forward. "House Ashford pledges support," he said formally, "both financial and logistical." "House Blackwood as well," Helena added. One by one, the Northern families committed. By the end, every house present had pledged support for the initiative. It was a triumph far beyond what Lydia had dared hope. But the real victory came when a capital family, House Marston, moderately powerful, stepped forward. "House Marston would like to extend this program to our Southern Territories," Lady Marston said. "With your permission and guidance, Duchess Vance." Lydia had to work to keep her expression neutral. A capital family was asking for her guidance, acknowledging her expertise, treating her as an equal. "Of course," she said warmly. "We'll coordinate together." As the reception wound down, guests lingered to congratulate her. The atmosphere was celebratory, almost euphoric. They'd done more than throw a successful party. They'd shifted the power dynamics of the entire northern region. Dorian pulled her aside in a quiet corner, his expression fierce with pride. "Do you understand what you just accomplished? You unified the northern families around a common cause, created a program that will save lives and build loyalty for generations. And you made the capital families come to you asking for help." "We accomplished it," she corrected. "This was teamwork." "No, this was you, your vision, your leadership, your ability to make people believe in something better." He cupped her face. "I chose you because I thought you'd survive. I never imagined you'd conquer." She kissed him then, not caring who saw. Let them witness that the Duke and Duchess of the Northern Marches were united in every way that mattered. The next night was the Imperial Gala itself, the grand event where the Empire's elite gathered to see and be seen. Lydia dressed with even more care than she had for their reception, knowing this was the final battlefield. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, hundreds of guests in their finest clothing, wealth and power on ostentatious display. And there, holding court in the center of it all, was Cassandra Morven. She looked magnificent in ice blue silk, surrounded by her remaining allies, still commanding attention through sheer force of personality. When her eyes found Lydia across the ballroom, they blazed with undisguised hatred. Lydia smiled and inclined her head politely, the gesture of an equal, not a subordinate. Cassandra's face went tight. "She's cornered," Dorian murmured. "Your reception stole half her supporters. Your medical initiative made her look frivolous. She's losing influence by the hour. Then she'll strike soon. Cornered animals are the most dangerous." They didn't have to wait long. Cassandra glided across the ballroom, her expression arranged into false warmth. Duchess Vance, how lovely to see you. I heard about your little gathering last night. How quaint. It was productive, Lydia replied evenly. We accomplished quite a bit. So I heard. A medical program for peasants. Very charitable. The contempt in Cassandra's voice was barely masked. Though I wonder if you're not overextending yourself. Managing a territory. Implementing new programs. Playing Duchess. It's so much responsibility for someone so inexperienced. Around them, conversations quieted. People sensed confrontation. I appreciate your concern, Lydia said, her tone sweet as poison. But I found that experience comes quickly when you're willing to actually do the work rather than just attending parties. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to Cassandra like that in public. Cassandra's mask slipped, showing fury underneath. You think winning one trial makes you untouchable? You're still the desperate girl who sold herself for money. Everyone knows it. Your entire position is built on the fact that you were willing to prostitute yourself to save your worthless family. The words were designed to wound, to humiliate, to reduce Lydia to tears in front of the entire imperial elite. Instead, Lydia laughed. The sound was genuine, almost delighted. Is that really the best you have? After everything, the hunting incident, the trial, all your schemes, you fall back on slut-shaming? She shook her head. How disappointing. I expected better from someone with your reputation for cunning. You kick out, yes, I married Dorian for money. We both know it. The Empire knows it. The contract was public record during the trial. Lydia stepped closer, her voice carrying clearly. But here's what you don't seem to understand, Cassandra. I'm not ashamed of survival. I did what I had to do to save my family, and then I did what I had to do to earn my place in the North. I've proven myself through action, not just bloodline and gossip. You've proven nothing but audacity. I've proven that I'm willing to risk my life for people who need me. I've proven I can govern a territory effectively. I've proven I can win in your court system when you tried to destroy me legally. I've proven I can unite the northern families around a common cause. Lydia's voice was steel wrapped in silk. What have you proven lately, Cassandra? Beyond an ability to hold grudges and attack women you're jealous of? The ballroom was dead silent. No one breathed. Cassandra's face went white, then red. Jealous? Of you? You're nothing. If I'm nothing, why have you spent months trying to destroy me? Lydia smiled. Why did you manufacture charges? Why did you try to humiliate me at Ravenwood? Why are you here now, desperate to tear me down in front of witnesses? If I'm so irrelevant, why do you care so much? The logic was inescapable, and everyone in the room could see it. Cassandra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in decades, she had no counter. No clever riposte, no way to turn the situation to her advantage. She'd lost. And she knew it. You'll regret this, she finally hissed. All of it. I'll make sure. You'll make sure of nothing. Dorian's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. He'd been silent until now, letting Lydia fight her own battle. But his patience had limits. You've attacked my wife repeatedly. You've attempted to destroy her through social, physical, and legal means. You failed every time. And now you threaten her openly, in front of the imperial court. He stepped forward, and even the most powerful nobles in the room instinctively stepped back. His reputation as the frontier duke, cold, ruthless, dangerous, suddenly filled the space. If you continue this vendetta, he said quietly, I will consider it an attack on the northern marches itself, and I will respond accordingly. Do I make myself clear? It wasn't a question. It was a promise of war. Cassandra looked between them, the Duchess who'd outmaneuvered her at every turn, the Duke who'd just threatened her with military consequences. Her power base was crumbling, her influence waning, her schemes defeated. She had nothing left. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, Lydia replied gently. It is. Cassandra turned and fled the ballroom, her remaining allies scrambling to follow. The crowd watched her go in stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. Lord Ashford, his expression amused and approving. Others joined in, slowly at first, then building to genuine applause. For Lydia, for her courage in standing up to Cassandra's decades of social tyranny. The shift was seismic. In one confrontation, Lydia had accomplished what no one else had managed. She'd broken Cassandra Morven's hold on Northern society. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of congratulations and new alliance offers. Families who'd been neutral suddenly wanted to align with the Vances. Capital nobles who dismissed the northern provinces now viewed them with respect. By the time they returned to their residence in the early morning hours, Lydia was exhausted but exhilarated. "You were magnificent," Dorian said, pulling her into his arms. "Absolutely magnificent." I was terrified. "You didn't show it. You faced her down like a warrior." He kissed her forehead. "I've never been prouder." "We should return to the hold soon," Lydia said. "There's work to do. The medical program needs implementation, winter preparations for the villages, 100 other things." "Always thinking about the territory." "It's my home. Our home. Of course I think about it." She looked up at him. "Is that strange? That I've come to love the place I was sent to as punishment?" "Not strange, just proof that you belong there." His arms tightened around her. "With me." They stayed in the capital for another week, solidifying alliances and finalizing plans for the medical initiative. During that time, word reached them that Cassandra had withdrawn to Ravenwood and was refusing all visitors. Her social power was broken. Some of her former allies were already distancing themselves, sensing her decline. It was a complete victory. And Lydia felt no guilt about it. Cassandra had tried to destroy her repeatedly, had shown no mercy, no restraint, no hesitation in her attacks. She'd earned her defeat through her own cruelty. On the journey back north, Lydia watched the landscape change from soft capital luxury to harsh frontier beauty and felt her heart settle. This was home. These windswept hills and pine forests, the hard-won territory Dorian had built and she'd learned to govern. When Vance Hold came into view, the entire population had assembled to greet them, not just staff and soldiers, but villagers from across the territory. Word of the gala confrontation had spread, and they'd come to celebrate. Torvin stepped forward, gruff as always. "Welcome home, Your Grace. We heard you put that southern witch in her place." "I defended our territory's honor," Lydia replied, "as anyone would." "Not anyone, you." He thrust a bundle at her. Another cloak, this one embroidered with symbols from every village in the territory. "From all of us. Because you're one of us now. Northern-born in spirit, even if not in blood." Lydia's vision blurred. She accepted the cloak, wrapped it around her shoulders, and felt the weight of belonging settle like a blessing. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you. For accepting me, for trusting me, for making this home." The cheers that followed echoed off the hold stone walls. That night, alone in their chambers, Dorian presented her with documents he'd been preparing in secret. "What's this?" she asked, scanning the legal language. "A new marriage contract, one that replaces the original." He watched her face as she read. "It removes all the transactional language, establishes you as equal partner in everything, property, decisions, authority, and it includes provisions for any children we have to inherit jointly, regardless of gender." Lydia looked up sharply. "Gender? But the original contract specified a male heir." "The original contract is void. This is what I want, what we want, a true partnership where our children, sons or daughters, inherit based on capability, not arbitrary rules." His hand covered hers. "I don't need a son to validate my line. I need someone strong enough to carry it forward. And after watching you these past months, I know that strength isn't determined by gender." She read through the contract more carefully. It was everything the original wasn't: respectful, equal, based on love rather than transaction. "When did you have time to draft this?" "I started it after the trial, finished it before the gala. I was waiting for the right moment." He pulled her close. "I told you I wanted a real marriage. This makes it legal." "I'll sign it," she said, "but only if you promise me something. Anything. That we keep evolving, that we don't become complacent, that we keep fighting for each other and this territory, no matter what comes." She met his eyes. "This world is harsh. We've survived by being harder. I don't want us to lose that edge." "We won't, because we have something most people don't, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. That's stronger than any contract." He kissed her softly. "I promise we'll keep fighting, together, always." They signed the new contract that night, witnessed by Mrs. Halford and Captain Hendricks. The old document was burned in the fireplace, its ashes swept away like the desperate circumstances that had created it. What remained was choice, and love, and a future they'd build together. The following spring brought changes that rippled through the Northern Territories. The medical training program launched successfully, with Helena Blackwood overseeing the curriculum. Village healers from across the region gathered at the hold for intensive training, then returned home with skills that saved countless lives. The Northern Families Alliance strengthened, unified by shared investment in the program. Trade agreements flourished. Defensive pacts ensured that raiders thought twice before attacking any settlement. The territory prospered in ways it hadn't under Dorian's sole leadership. His military strength combined with Lydia's strategic governance created something powerful and sustainable. And Cassandra Morven faded into irrelevance, her power broken, her influence gone. She remained at Ravenwood, bitter and isolated, a cautionary tale about what happened when cruelty replaced genuine leadership. 2 years after Lydia's arrival, she stood in the hold's great hall watching her daughter, not the required son, but a fierce little girl with Dorian's eyes and Lydia's stubborn determination, take her first steps. "She's going to be trouble," Dorian observed fondly. "Good. This world needs more trouble from strong women." Lydia scooped up their daughter, who shrieked with delight. "We'll teach her everything. How to be strategic, how to be ruthless when necessary, how to survive and then thrive. How to choose her own path," Dorian added, "like her mother did." Lydia looked around the hall, at the maps marking their territory, at the staff who'd become family, at the husband who'd started as a stranger and become her partner in every way that mattered. She'd come here as a desperate girl sold into marriage, a transaction meant to save her family from ruin. She'd left that girl behind somewhere between Ravenwood and Millbrook, between survival and triumph. What remained was a woman who'd forged her own power in the harshest environment imaginable, who'd faced every challenge without breaking, who'd transformed a cold contract into genuine love. She was the Duchess of the Northern Marches, not because she'd been purchased, but because she'd earned it. And that made all the difference. Outside the hold, winter was giving way to spring. The harsh landscape was softening, showing hints of green, but the fundamental character remained, strong, uncompromising, beautiful in its refusal to be anything but itself, like the woman who'd learned to call it home. Lydia stood at the window with her daughter in her arms and her husband at her side, looking out over the territory they'd built together. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and opportunities, hardships and triumphs. They'd face it all together, as partners, as equals, as two people who'd chosen each other every day since the contract that brought them together became irrelevant. The desperate bargain had become an unbreakable bond, and in the end, that was worth more than all the gold in the empire. "What are you thinking?" Dorian asked softly. Lydia smiled. "That I'd do it all again. Every terrible moment, every impossible choice, because it led me here, to you, to this life we've built. Even the parts where you nearly died? Especially those parts. They proved I was strong enough to survive anything." She turned to face him, her expression fierce with love and determination. "We're going to build something that lasts, Dorian. A legacy that has nothing to do with bloodlines or contracts or old power structures. Something real. We already have." He gestured to the territory beyond the window. "This, us, the changes we've made, the lives we've saved. That's the legacy." Their daughter chose that moment to grab the Vance emerald hanging at Lydia's throat, fascinated by how it caught the light. Lydia laughed and gently pried small fingers away from the necklace that had once symbolized her purchased status. Now it just meant family, belonging, home. The years that followed would bring new challenges, political upheaval in the capital, border conflicts, harsh winters, and difficult harvests. But Lydia and Dorian faced each trial the way they'd faced everything since that rainy day she'd signed her future away. Together, strategic, refusing to break. Their daughter grew strong and fierce, trained in both combat and governance, prepared to inherit a territory shaped by her parents' partnership. Eventually she'd have siblings, sons and daughters who'd learn that power came not from birthright, but from earning respect through action. The medical program expanded beyond the Northern Territories. saving thousands of lives and cementing the Vance reputation as leaders who cared about practical solutions over political posturing. And though Cassandra Morvan lived another decade, she never regained her influence. She died isolated and bitter, a footnote in a story that had moved far beyond her capacity to damage. But all of that was future. In this moment, in the spring sunlight streaming through the hold's windows, Lydia held her daughter and her husband's hand and felt complete. She'd been forged in crisis, tempered in battle, proven through fire. She'd transformed from victim to survivor to conqueror. She was exactly who she'd always had the potential to be. She just needed the harsh northern frontier to reveal it. And now, standing in the home she'd earned through courage and refusing to break, surrounded by the family she'd built through choice rather than obligation, Lydia Vance, the desperate girl who'd signed a contract to save her family, was finally, truly free. The contract had expired. The love remained. And that was everything.